Will be called to order, the hour of 7 o'clock having arrived. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and thank you for coming this morning, particularly those that have traveled from northern Idaho or from eastern Idaho. It's good to see you here. This is Idaho's legislature at work, and we hope to do that to the best of our ability and to have that in front of you today. So again, thank you for coming. We'll ask the Secretary to call a silent roll. We do have a quorum present and we are ready for business. The first thing I would like to do, and oh, by the way, I just want to mention, if you think you're nervous, we're really nervous too. So let's just all kind of relax for a second. We'll get through this day, but the big part of today is to make sure that everybody that is here that wants to address the committee has the opportunity to do that. I think that's very important. The committee thinks that's very important, and we'll stay as long as necessary, and we've got tomorrow, if necessary, to make sure that everybody that wants to address the committee has the opportunity to do that. And again, thank you for coming. I'd like to go over a little bit with you this morning the process that we're going to use, and then a little bit about the decorum of how we're going to conduct the meeting. First of all, Mr. Hensley from the governor's office is going to present the bill. Mr. Hensley will be allotted the time necessary to present that bill, and then we'll stand for questions from the committee. Next is Mr. Hoffman for the opposition, and Mr. Hoffman will be granted the same amount of time that Mr. Hensley has to make his presentation to the committee. Questions of either Mr. Hensley or Mr. Hoffman will not count toward their presentation time. Then we will take testimony from the citizens. We anticipate significantly more people coming than is here right now, so we're going to, by necessity, limit the testimony to 3 minutes. We ask that you be very precise. We ask that you, there is a timer up here on the podium, and it switches from green to orange and then to red when your 3 minutes are up. So if you would try and wrap up your testimony within that allotted time, because again, we anticipate a lot of people to testify today, and to be respectful of everybody else, we certainly request that you kind of be aware of that time and hold to that time. What I'm going to try and do is to call 2 or 3 names ahead of time. We have some reserved seats right here on the very first row, and when I call your name, if you would make your way up and then take a seat there, and then come to the podium and make your comments at that time. I apologize ahead of time for pronunciation of names. I never was very good at that, and you'll probably see that today, but there's nothing intended about that. It's just that I don't do that very well, and I don't mean any offense to anybody. After you finish testifying, if you would, it would be best to go up the side aisles to not interfere with the person that is coming up to testify. There's an additional room across the hall there that people can go in and sit and listen to the testimony if in fact this room fills up. When you do come up to the podium, if you would please state your name and who you represent, whether it's yourself or whether you represent an organization or whatever, for the record, because this is being audio and video streamed, and a record is kept of your testimony today. There are bathrooms right outside of the door to your left here, and the cafeteria is open and the public is welcome to the cafeteria. Let's talk a little bit about decorum, because I think this is important. You know, on Monday, the House and the Senate concurred in a resolution to name this room the Abraham Lincoln Auditorium. And, you know, Abraham Lincoln was one of our greatest presidents. And I think that we all think his spirit lives here, and his spirit would be one of civility and one of appropriate decorum, one of ideas, and that's why the committee is here today, to listen to your ideas. This bill is about an insurance exchange and the choice that Idaho has to make. It's not about other things. And I understand the passion, et cetera, associated with the whole issue of the Affordable Care Act in the United States and what that means and what that doesn't mean to a lot of people. This is about one very small part of it. It's about insurance exchanges. And so the committee would respectfully request that you keep your comments to the insurance exchange and the bill at hand. I think that will help us get through the day in kind of an orderly fashion. We ask that you be very respectful of anyone else's testimony. There are deeply held beliefs here, no matter which side of this issue you're on. And I think it's important to respect everybody's everybody's beliefs in this issue. To that end, we don't want any applause, shouting, whistling, clapping, or displays of emotion. I understand, again, that there's great emotion involved in this. And when people come to the podium, they're anxious, as we all are here today. But I think we can get through this if we help one another, be respectful of one another, and stick to the points that everybody wants to make. You may not hear very many questions today, and the reason is that we want to hear from you. This is your time to address the committee. It's not the committee's time to jabber or whatever. We'll have time to do that after the testimony is over with. So don't take offense to the fact that there may not be many questions. The fact is that we really want to hear from you. Along about 9 a.m., the committee is going to take about a 5-minute break because we've scheduled 4 hours today, and 4 hours is a long time without a break. So kind of expect that. We do need to be on the floor at 11 o'clock, and depending upon how the testimony goes and how many people are here, we may or may not get done today. Again, I have scheduled hearings for tomorrow if necessary, because I think it's very important to hear from each of you. I don't think I have anything else at this point in time. The only order of business before the committee today is House Bill 248, which is the healthcare exchange. So without further ado, Mr. Hensley, if you would please, sir, approach the podium, state your name, who you represent, and the podium is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is David Hensley. I'm here today on behalf of Governor Otter to present House Bill 248. Before I do so, it's important to provide you with some context for our discussion today. There's really three things I'd like you to remember. The first, there will be an exchange in the state of Idaho. The only question is whether it will be a state-based, federal, or hybrid exchange. Second, there will be a market outside of the exchange to purchase health insurance. And third, starting in 2014, there will be market reforms or changes that impact all health insurance plans sold in and outside of an exchange. With this background in mind, I want to highlight a few of the provisions of House Bill 248. Specifically, I want to talk about the authorities of the exchange, the limitations and oversight incorporated into this bill, and provide an overview of the possible costs associated with a state-based exchange. As you know, House Bill 248 creates a state-based health insurance exchange as an independent body, corporate and politic. It is not a state agency. The day-to-day management of the exchange is entrusted to a board of 19 Idahoans, selected by the governor, subject to Senate confirmation. The board is empowered to adopt bylaws that must be reviewed and approved by the director of the Department of Insurance. The board is also empowered to assess and collect fees from people and companies who buy or sell insurance through the exchange. They can appoint advisory committees, take legal action, it can contract for services, but to do so it has to accept requests for proposals, and it can develop and implement a plan of operation. Now let's look at some of the limitations, or what the exchange cannot do under this bill. The exchange cannot change its legal structure. It has to be financially self-sufficient. It cannot ask the state for state funds and cannot tax or encumber state assets. It has to be a voluntary marketplace in that it cannot force anyone to buy insurance, nor can it prohibit carriers or producers from participating in the exchange as long as they meet the requirements of applicable law. It has to have an independent third-party audit on an annual basis. It has to conduct its meetings in public, pursuant to the open meeting laws of the state of Idaho. It has to have a procurement process. It cannot inquire about gun or ammunition use, ownership, possession, or storage. And it has to certify to the governor and to the director the security of exchange users' personal information before it can proceed. House Bill 248 also provides legislative oversight, and I'd like to touch on a few of those points. Again, board members will be subject to Senate confirmation. 3 legislators are going to sit on this board for the exchange as voting members. On an annual basis, the board must submit a written report of its activities to the legislature. It must also report to the germane committees of the legislature during the session and provide information on any changes in its bylaws, changes in federal law or regulations, and any changes in its fees. Now, I'd like to talk about some of the possible costs of a state-based exchange. There are really 2 types of costs associated with an exchange. There are the startup costs, or the costs of implementing the exchange, and then there are ongoing operational costs. So let's start with what we know. When it comes to the implementation costs, we know there is federal money available to build the exchange. Idaho has already received $20 million in federal funds, and additional federal grants are available through December 31st of 2014 to build the exchange. We know that states like Nevada and Mississippi have most of the technology components already completed, and they're willing to share that with the state of Idaho. We know there are companies in the marketplace who can also provide the technology as well. Now, we believe the startup costs are somewhere in the neighborhood between $20 and $30 million, because we're not starting from scratch. And initial early estimates were quite a bit higher than that, but again, that was if you had to start from scratch. And it did not take into account the advantages that we could get from other states and the marketplace. As for the ongoing costs, we know the exchange must be self-sufficient pursuant to the terms of House Bill 248. We know that it cannot obligate the state or request state funding for those ongoing costs. Based on the information we received this past summer, we believe the annual ongoing costs of operating the exchange is roughly $10 million a year. We also know that the feds are going to charge a 3.5% premium on plans that would be offered through a federal exchange. And we've been told by the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level that the ongoing cost for a federal exchange will be around $28 million, which Idahoans would have to bear. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hensley. Are there any questions of Mr. Hensley? Representative Vandewalle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hensley. In this bill, the governor appoints the board for four-year terms. Is there any thought given to why they all seem to be four-year terms and not staggered terms, so that the board doesn't change all at once every 4 years?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, although they are four-year terms, the governor can reappoint those individuals. And although some of those individuals may want to be reappointed, we want to take a look holistically at the board itself and take a look at that time to make sure that they're doing right by the people of the state of Idaho. So if it requires a wholesale change, we could do that. If not, we could reappoint those who want to continue to serve and are doing a good job.
Is there any other questions? Representative Morris.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Hensley, why do you feel that the state exchange alternative better reflects independence and sovereignty for the state than the federal option?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think that really hinges on three key areas where the state's going to exercise discretion and control. The first is governance. The people who are going to run the exchange are selected by the governor instead of HHS. They're subject to Senate confirmation. They are Idahoans. They will conduct their business here in the state of Idaho as opposed to Washington, D.C., going to conduct that business in an open and transparent process to be accountable to the people of the state of Idaho. The next is the financing. As I've told you, I believe that the ongoing operations the state has control over in a state-based exchange. And every attempt would be made to limit the costs so that we have a cost-effective exchange for the state of Idaho. Under the federal exchange, that decision-making rests with the federal government. We know that they want to charge 3.5% fees on the plans that are sold through that exchange. Those decisions will be made in Washington. And then finally, oversight. Under the state exchange, the board and the state get to sign off on plan certification, determine the criteria for qualified health plans. They get to review rates, the actuarial plan values. We get to say who the navigators are, and navigators are those people who will help consumers identify plans that meet their needs within the exchange. And again, we can impact transparency and accountability through that process. I think those decisions made at the local level, made at the state level, are a demonstration of our authority, our ability to control what we can within this process. Those decisions being made by the state, we believe, are better than being made by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
Representative Hickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hensley, will creating a state-based exchange limit the insurance market in any way in the state of Idaho?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, no, it will not. And as contemplated under House Bill 248, this would be an open exchange. And as I pointed out, the exchange can't prohibit producers or providers or carriers from providing insurance plans through the exchange, as long as they meet the applicable laws. And so, again, it's not going to hamper or prohibit anyone from providing that insurance plan through the exchange. And there will be a marketplace outside of the exchange where insurance agents will still be free to sell plans to people who are not participating voluntarily through the exchange.
Are there Representative Hansie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hensley, you stated that we received a grant for $20 million from the federal government to set up a state base, but you also alluded that it may be more like $30 million. Will the state be responsible for that makeup of $10 million, or where will that money come from?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, there are additional federal grants available that the state can apply for. The state will not be on the hook for that money. And as a matter of fact, if you create this entity, the board itself would apply for those additional federal funds.
Mr. Hensley, let's follow up on that for a moment. Let's presume for a moment that we start down the road of a state-based exchange, and after a year we decide we don't want to do that anymore, so we pull the plug. and Idaho hands it back to the federal government. Is Idaho liable for any of that grant money that we have used to set up the state-based exchange and then decided not to do that?
Mr. Chairman, the answer is no.
Thank you. Representative Romerell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hensley, several of our constituents have stated that if we pass this law, we will be in violation of the Idaho Health Freedom Act. Is that true?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we were aware of those concerns. The administration has asked on 2 separate occasions for Attorney General's opinions on that very issue. Both of those opinions were provided to the Secretary and hopefully to the committee, but the answer is no, and the Attorney General found that state-based exchange does not violate the Idaho Health Freedom Act.
Representative Vanderwoude.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hensley. I understand that we're going to get federal grant money to set up the exchange, and the exchange is going to have to run off of the premium addition to function it. How does it function if it hasn't sold a policy yet? Once it has established the exchange, nobody has gone through the exchange, where's the funding going to come to run the exchange prior to any policies or anybody actually accessing the exchange and creating the premium surcharge?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I believe the answer is twofold. First of all, the implementation funds from the federal government can carry the exchange through 2015 when it has to be self-sufficient. Okay? Second, this exchange, pursuant to House Bill 248, would be eligible to receive other funds outside of state funds, including fees, and if those fees aren't generated, it could receive other funds. So there's 2 provisions in terms of covering those initial startup costs and the preliminary ongoing costs that may be occurred before a single policy is sold.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hensley. My question is, why are we considering passing a bill before we know all of the federal rules?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, well, first of all, the state has a great understanding of what's required for a state-based exchange. We feel comfortable, and the Department of Insurance feels comfortable, that we understand what's required of us under the federal regs and the law in terms of establishing a state-based exchange. Now, the questions do exist about what a federal exchange is going to look like. And some of that information is still forthcoming in terms of the federal regs and their provisions as to how they would operate that. But we've looked at this. We looked at the law. We've looked at the regs. We have a very good understanding and comfort level with what's going to be required of us to proceed with a state-based exchange.
Are there any further questions? Mr. Hensley, with respect to an agency of the state, if we set up the exchange according to House Bill 248, is the state in any way liable for any acts or liable for any monies or liable for essentially anything else that this exchange might do or be liable for in default of not doing what they're supposed to do, et cetera?
Mr. Chairman, the language of House Bill 248 explicitly says the state is not.
Thank you. Are there further questions of Mr. Hensley? Representative Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hensley, I do have a question for you. I've heard an awful lot from people who are concerned that, one, that they're going to be forced to use the exchange, and I believe you've kind of dealt with that. But they also think that somehow their information, their personal medical information, this type of thing, all has to go into the exchange, and then that all gets transferred to the IRS. Can you address that at all?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, first of all, I want to start with before the exchange can accept an application, before the exchange can conduct its operations moving forward, it has to certify to the governor and the director of the Department of Insurance that that information, whatever personal information may be submitted through the exchange, is secure. Okay? And we're protecting the privacy of those individuals. There are some reporting requirements that the exchange will have to comply with in terms of the federal government. For example, an individual may qualify to not have insurance at all and not be subject to the individual mandate. That information has to be conveyed to the federal government via the exchange. There are other aspects of that, but I think for the most part, what we've tried to do with this bill is help Idahoans achieve a comfort level that whatever information they provide in the course of voluntarily shopping, comparing, and purchasing insurance through the exchange is protected.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
Thank you. And so I just want to be perfectly clear. PPACA, though, does not mandate that people have to use the exchange. Is that correct?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that is correct, and the provisions of this bill make sure that no one is forced to use the exchange. It's completely voluntary.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Hickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Hensley, quick question for you. One great concern that people have had in the past is that we lack true legislative oversight with this process. And, you know, I, for one, am somewhat distrusting of a state insurance exchange. However, with some of the things that you had mentioned, such as the legislators now being voting members, the Senate confirmation, and the reporting requirements of the state exchange to the legislature, do we still have the authority, if something starts to go sideways here, to pull the plug on the whole operation at some point in time? I'm talking about the legislature.
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes.
Thank you. Representative Vandewater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a follow-up on Representative Perry's comments. We do understand that there's reporting on your health information if you go through the exchange. If you don't go through the exchange, is that same health information transferred to the government if you are just buying a health insurance policy outside of the exchange?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, all I can speak to is the exchange. The market outside of the exchange, I'm not sure what will be required of those insurance providers or carriers who are selling policies outside of the exchange, but I can say this. Pursuant to the provisions of this bill, the exchange can't reach out and take that information from providers or carriers. It can't reach out and force them to provide that if that transaction is outside and separate of the exchange.
Follow up, Mr.
Representative
Chairman.
Vandewater.
And just for clarification, because I think some of the explanations we've had is, well, the information that the exchange is going to send to the federal government already has, such as your income and stuff like that because of your tax return. But would be safe to say that the government does not have your health information, or does the government have access to your health information outside of this mechanism of the exchange?
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, what type of health information are you referring to?
Representative.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hensley, when you apply for a health insurance policy, I mean, you know, they're asking all the other information, what other conditions you have and stuff like that. You know, if you had a heart attack, if you had this, do you have high blood pressure, all that kind of information that goes into when you're applying for a health insurance policy.
Mr. Hensley.
Mr. Chairman and Representative, thank you. One of the things to think about is the exchange is going to have a level of information that the individual will interact and provide. How many people are in your family? How many people you want to cover? The preliminary information to determine eligibility, to determine which sort of policies the individual wants to purchase. Then they're going to be provided with options, and they'll be able to look at those options based on their own circumstances. If that sort of information that you're talking about is necessary, that's going to occur between the carrier or the provider and the individual, not the exchange.
Are there any further questions of Mr. Hensley? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Hensley. Mr. Wayne Hoffman. After Mr. Hoffman will be Greg Furch and then Woody Richards.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having me. I'm not quite sure, Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have? I truly wasn't paying as close attention to the clock as I should have been.
8 to 10 minutes.
I'll try to be very, very precise.
Thank
How
you.
about that?
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
I want to thank you for allowing me time to be before your committee. By way of background, I am Wayne Hoffman. I'm the executive director of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, which is a nonprofit public policy research organization based in Boise. We're 4 years old. Since the beginning of our organization, we've been working on health care issues. One of the earliest involvements we had in this issue was proposing in late 2009 that Idaho pass what became the Idaho Health Freedom Act, which was passed by the legislature in 2010. I served on the Governor's Health Insurance Exchange Task Force along with Representative Rushi and had a very pleasant experience in doing so. We've been opposed to the state insurance exchange in its many different forms since the beginning. I want to kind of just talk a little bit about the health insurance exchange concept and then talk to you a little bit about the bill. First of all, you have heard that Idaho will be able to control its destiny by doing this insurance exchange. To be very, very clear, Idaho will have to conform to very specific regulations from the federal government, and those regulations are continuing to change. I had the ability to say up until last Friday that I had read the entire PPACA legislation and all the rules, but then the government came out with new federal regulations with regard to PPACA, and I haven't had a chance to read those rules yet. What you are adopting, in a sense, when you pass the insurance exchange are not only the rules that have been promulgated by the federal government, but those rules that have not yet been promulgated. You've been told that Idaho will do a better job dealing with the insurance exchange because Idahoans will deal with a local person rather than a federal agency. And I wonder how many times we've all been told that, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Hoffman or Representative Hickson or whoever it may be, but we're just following federal regulations and that's why we can't help you with your problem. You're getting told that Idaho will have a seat at the table if you created an insurance exchange. Well, not really. If there were a seat at the table, then when the federal government was writing the original regulations for the Affordable Care Act, they would have come to you and said, how should we write these regulations? They did not do that. So therefore, it's a questionable scenario that you'll have a seat at the table. I'd argue there is no table. And if there is a table, it's in the same room with all the unicorns and the elves. It doesn't exist. It's in fantasy land. Idaho can back out of the insurance exchange. That's very, very true. But you can back out of anything else for that matter. You can back out of Medicaid. It's a completely optional program. You don't have to run it. You can back out of food stamps. It's completely optional. You don't have to run it. I've been following public policy for 25 years, and I've only seen one example in which the government has gotten rid of a government program, and that was last year when the state of Idaho, the legislature, got rid of the renal program, the renal disease program, but that's already covered by another program, so it's not really quite the same thing. You can get rid of a lot of programs. You can pull the plug on lots of different things, but once you create a program, it's very, very difficult to get rid of it, which is why Ronald Reagan said there's nothing closer to eternal life on earth as a government bureaucracy. And I could go on. But let me talk a little bit about the legislation, which raises a lot of concerns, even despite the changes that were made from the original Senate bill. First of all, we have some issues with the fact that you are creating a new government agency. You may call it a non-government program or a non-government entity agency, but it is a government agency nonetheless because you have created it as a state legislature. It's like being perpetually pregnant. The fact is you have a government program that's running government rules and administering government functions, so it is a government agency. You can call it whatever you want, but that's what it is. I'd also argue with you that in adding language in the bill in 416108, where it says The Exchange Board shall, to the fullest extent practicable, enter into contracts with businesses conducting business in Idaho while employing citizens of the state. That sounds really nice, and it's touted as being pro-business, but actually it's extremely anti-free market. The Exchange Board is going to be stewards of government-administered fees, and you have an obligation to find the right contract, not just the contract that happens to exist from Idaho. We have some issues on the 10th Amendment questions on page 1, and you talk extensively in the bill. Pardon me. The bill speaks extensively about it being the public policy of the state to actively resist federal actions, and this is our way of doing it. But there's very precious little in the bill that actually says how that's going to be done. And I think there's a presumption that the same administration and the same legislature will be here a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, and that's not necessarily the case. You have to imagine a scenario where you have a governor who does not agree with you with regard to the Affordable Care Act, or a Senate that does not agree with you with regard to the Affordable Care Act, and want to see it administered and implemented to the fullest extent possible. This bill, House Bill 248, does not stop that from happening. In page 3, lines 47 through 50, you've added, or the bill adds a section from the Senate bill that says, consistent with 42 U.S.C. section 300 GG. Now, Representative Rushi hates it whenever I say this, but it's really true. Whenever you add a line in Idaho code that references U.S. code or U.S. federal code of regulations, you have created an unconstitutional delegation of legislative responsibility. Whenever the U.S. code changes, your statute changes also. And the only people who should be allowed to write Idaho code are the 105 of you who get to do that, who are elected to do that. And you can fix that simply by saying the U.S. code reference as it existed on a specified date. On page 5, lines 6 through 7, it adds the language, the exchange shall not inquire about the use of ownership or possession or storage of firearm or ammunition about anyone using the exchange. That's all very good. There's some background to that. If you look at the Affordable Care Act, Section 2717, the federal exchange is already limited from gathering that data. I would argue that you have to add that section if you were to have a state exchange. So this is not somehow pro-Second Amendment legislation all of a sudden. On page 5, lines 8 through 12, you add some language that says if any section of PPACA is declared to be unconstitutional or otherwise invalidated by a federal court, unless that ruling is stayed by the court, the exchange shall immediately cease the enforcement of the provisions that are affected. And that sounds well and good. The problem is you don't know what that ruling is going to look at. This is also a delegation of the legislature's lawmaking authority. And what happens if the court comes back and says, we're not going to administer, the court says Section 2717 that I just mentioned is not somehow unconstitutional? How do you reconcile the language in the bill with what the Exchange Board is supposed to accomplish? I could go on, I guess, but you have some very, very pronounced issues with the legislation that's before you. Even if you support a state insurance exchange, the fact that there's very little legislative oversight, that the fees aren't under control of the legislature, the fact that very few of the provisions restrain the exchange from operation are very, very concerning. And I want to be very, very clear and unambiguous about what we're doing here. And I think the supporters of the bill are sincere when they're saying they're trying to protect Idahoans from the long arm of the federal government. But let's be clear about the Affordable Care Act. It is socialism. You can't fix it. You can't outrun it. You can't contain it or make it better. You can't outsmart it. You can't manage it. If you accept some of it, you will clear a path to all of it. The states are the last stand against an overreaching, imposing federal government. My kids are 15 and 12. They're counting on you, and my unborn grandkids are counting on you to be that last stand and to continue to resist and reject this ill-conceived federal law. With that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Are there questions of Mr. Hoffman? Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
Mr. Chairman and committee, thank you very much for your time and attention.
You bet. Next, Greg Furch, then Woody Richards, and then Jim Kamalik. Okay, we're going to take a quick break here. We just lost power up at the podium, and so we can't record what's going on. We're not sure what the issue is. If you just hold up for a quick second, sir. Yeah. We think we've about got it resolved, so. Okay, we're up and running again. Sorry for that, Mr. Furch. Go ahead, please. If you'd state your name and who you represent, and if I could remind each of you to do that as you come to the podium. The podium is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Greg Furch, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I hope that power outage isn't an omen of Kathleen Sebelius changing rules on our state exchanges as we go along here. You know, this is difficult for me because I find longtime friends and business associates taking a different position than I do on this subject. And I understand that there's a lot of emotion in play here, but nevertheless, I'm here to stake out my position. One of the first things I'd like to suggest is that there is no such thing as federal money. The money that's used to purchase loyalty by the federal government originally came out of our pockets or ultimately ends up as debt on our part or our grandchildren's part. So I find that a specious argument to suggest that it's not going to cost Idahoans anything. That originally was our money to begin with. I agree with Mr. Hoffman with this idea about a seat at the table. I've worked with Medicare professionally for the last 19 years, and literally we wake up one morning and a bureaucrat has changed the font on a form, and healthcare providers across the nation have a deadline to implement a new form. I have personal knowledge of situations where Medicare has not followed their own published rules. They've just changed it like that. And I don't see that as a different scenario if we were to start implementing the state exchange. The way I look at this seat at the table concept is we're going to be relegated to that little table in the corner at the family get-togethers at the best. My real vision is that Kathleen Sebelius or Barack Obama are going to be there behind us, and at the minute we go to sit down at the table, they're going to snatch that chair out from underneath us. It was argued in the Senate that Idaho implemented the high-risk pool, and we did that successfully. And therefore, implementing a state exchange, we'll be able to do that successfully. I consider that an apples and oranges comparison because Barack Obama's fingerprints aren't on that Idaho high-risk pool. We're dealing with an entire different entity here. Boy, I'm quickly running out of time. It was argued that waiting, in the Senate hearings, it was argued that waiting for the rules to be known is like waiting to go on a trip until you know that all the lights are green. Well, for me, if I know that the only vehicle I have is a federal jalopy sitting in the driveway, I'm not as inclined to slap a Made in Idaho sticker on it and see how far it gets me. I might choose to sit and do something productive at home until I get a better vehicle to ride in. I've run out of time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Birch, thank you so much. We really appreciate your testimony today. Next is Woody Richards, then Jim Kamlick, and then Peggy Munson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Woody Richards, and I appreciate you allowing me to appear before you today. I'm an attorney lobbyist representing America's Health Insurance Plans, a national organization that's often referred to as AHIP. AHIP is the National Trade Association representing the health insurance industry. AHIP's insurance company members provide health and supplemental benefits to more than 200 million Americans through employer-sponsored coverage, individual insurance programs, public programs such as Medicare and Medicaid. AHIP advocates for public policies that expand access to affordable health care coverage to all Americans through a competitive marketplace that fosters choice, quality, and innovation. House Bill 248 proposes to create a state health insurance exchange in Idaho, and for the sake of brevity, I will concur with the presentation by the Governor's Chief of Staff, Mr. Hensley. AHIP previously endorsed the Senate version of this legislation, Senate Bill 1042, but we also are pleased with the efforts and the improvements that have been made in House Bill 248. A great deal of work has gone into House Bill 248 in an effort to make the state health insurance exchange concept even more appealing. Our reasons for support are several. First, the board members of the Idaho Exchange may not always be successful, but at least they will be at the negotiating table with the federal government and have the opportunity to achieve the best health insurance exchange possible for Idaho. Simply stated, you cannot improve the situation if you don't participate in the process. Second, we believe that the cost savings referred to in by the Governor's Chief of Staff for operation of a state exchange as compared to a federal exchange are significant. Those savings need to be kept in Idaho consumer pockets. Finally, we believe that it's important for Idaho consumers to have access to local regulators when they have problems or issues with the exchange. A state response is much more likely to be timely and helpful for the citizens of the state of Idaho. We appreciate your consideration of this bill, ask for your favorable vote, and available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Next will be Mr. Jim Kamlick. Mr. Kamlick, please, the podium is yours, sir.
Thank you, Representative Wood. It's Commissioner Schmelik from Idaho County is how you say that. Don't worry about it. It's been said wrong by me many times.
I apologize, sir.
You don't have to. Commissioner Wood, Representative Wood, Representative Perry, Chairman's Committee, thank you. And I would like to let you know that since October, I've been traveling around the state speaking on a different issue. I've been to Coeur d'Alene, I've been to Lewiston, I've been to Post Falls, I've been to Twin Falls, I've been to Murphy, Idaho, I've been to Grangeville, Idaho, my hometown where I'm at, and many spots in between, speaking completely on a different issue. But inevitably, these healthcare exchanges come up at every single one of these meetings I am at. And they wonder, the question is why? Why do we stand up against, when it comes to our Second Amendment rights and protecting those against the federal government, but we won't stand up to the federal government against these rights? They ask that question. They're very concerned about it. When we had as I've gone around the state, also the Republican Party as a whole is opposed to this. I was on the House floor of the House of Delegates for the Farm Bureau, State Farm Bureau Association. It's a 68,000 member organization. They also completely oppose this legislation of these state health care exchanges. They don't see any protection to them of their rights, and especially when it comes to their personal rights of records being released from the IRS, records of their health care records, and their personal finance records. They have serious concerns and questions. As a Catholic, I do not recognize my religious freedoms being respected to these health care exchanges, and I'm very, very concerned about that. When I attended the Senate committee meetings, every person that spoke in favor of these things was either a healthcare lobbyist or a healthcare representative or an insurance representative. But the people that spoke of this were your average Idahoans who came down here and spent their own money, spent time in hotels, and had genuine concerns in their voice, and many of them sounded like genuine fear for what this would mean to their personal liberties and responsibilities that they feel they are losing. Ronald Reagan reminded us that it was a wonderful time to be alive in the 1980s. And I believe when he said those words, they also carried back to when our founding fathers said no to the king. And I think it's time we said no to this gentleman who thinks he's a king. And I believe that carries forward today. And I believe Ronald Reagan was right when he said those words, and that we need to be a party of opposition and present genuine ideas and solutions to the challenge we face. And that when he said these words, I'd like to remind you that this is a wonderful time to be alive, and we're lucky not to live in pale and timid times. We've been blessed with an opportunity to stand for something, for liberty and freedom and fairness, and these are values worth fighting for. I would urge you to vote no against these state health care exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We really appreciate your testimony, and thank you for coming down today. We really appreciate it. After Ms. Munson will be Carrie Uhlenkott and then Karen Calisterio.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Peggy Munson, and I'm a retired geriatric nurse, and I currently serve as the AARP Idaho State Volunteer President. Thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts and perspectives with you today. AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with 178,000 members, age 50 plus across Idaho, and I speak in support of House Bill 248, and I am not alone. While there has been much discussion lately about saying no, what I want to tell you is that Idahoans are saying yes, and overwhelmingly want this legislature to create a state-based health insurance exchange in Idaho. In a January 2012 scientific survey of registered voters, and this was emailed to you yesterday, AARP Idaho found strong bipartisan support for a state-based insurance exchange, 73% to be exact. This support comes from voters in which half identified themselves as Republican, nearly a quarter identified themselves as independent, and a small number identified themselves as Democrats. In a statewide telephone town hall forum yesterday morning, we engaged over 6,500 Idaho members in a discussion about the merits of the health insurance exchange. And 81% voiced support for a state-based health insurance exchange in Idaho. In recent weeks, there has also been other polls showing similar results, reinforcing the fact that a vast majority of Idahoans support an Idaho health exchange. So what does all this mean? It means that through the discussions taking place all around the state, Idahoans have become more educated and learned about our opinions and have currently decided a state-based exchange created and managed by Idahoans for Idahoans is the best path forward. Some say that taking no action or delaying the action is the best way to go. These are not the choices we have. Like it or not, there's going to be a health insurance exchange in the state of Idaho, whether it's run by the federal government or our state. Therefore, we respectfully urge your support of this bill so Idaho can have the opportunity to take the responsibility and control. Governor Otter has shown tremendous leadership throughout this process and has defended Idaho's sovereignty at every turn. But the governor recognizes that given the lack of options, what is the best interest of all Idahoans is to adopt an Idaho-based health exchange. This approach preserves our ability to manage and control our marketplace. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Munson. After Carrie Uhlenkott and Karen Calisterio will be Christine Tidens. Please go ahead, ma'am. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Carrie Uhlenkott, and I'm a legislative coordinator for the Right to Life of Idaho, which is a statewide pro-life educational and lobbying group. We are asking you to oppose House Bill 248. We're just very concerned because there is no explicit protection for unborn life within this legislation, and let me explain. Because of Idaho's abortion opt-out language that was passed in 2011, the Attorney General's legal opinion states that under a state or federal exchange, or insurance companies may not provide coverage for either surgical abortions or for the abortion-inducing drug, RU486. But the insurance companies would be required to provide for Plan B and ELA, which are emergency contraceptives, because they are considered contraceptives. But Plan B and ELA are also potential abortifacients, since they can prevent the implantation of a fertilized ovum, the unborn child. Dr. James Tressel, who is a member of Planned Parenthood's National Medical Committee and one of the world's leading authorities on emergency contraception, has said that doctors have a duty to inform women that emergency contraception could prevent a newly conceived embryo from implanting in the womb, causing an abortion. From our understanding, insurance companies will be required here to provide coverage for emergency contraception, whether we have a federal exchange or a state exchange. But the employer mandate tax can only be imposed under the state exchange. Now, as you know, the Affordable Care Act requires businesses with more than 50 employees to provide government-approved health care plans, or, if they don't do that, face a tax penalty and it can be up to $3,000 per employee. But due to the way the law has been written, the Affordable Care Act depends on the existence of a state exchange to impose this tax penalty. Now, I've cited several noted authorities in my written testimony. You can see that from get that from the Secretary. And I encourage you to read those noted authorities. They include the Congressional Research Service, and they've all concluded that the employer mandate applies only in states that create and fund their own exchanges. And likewise, the federal subsidies that flow through the state exchanges and thus subsidize the emergency contraceptives are allowed only in states that create and fund their own exchanges. And thank you. We just urge your vote no on House Bill 248.
Thank you, Ms. Uhlenkott, for testifying this morning. We really appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Next is Karen Calisterio, followed by Christine Tidens, and then Danielle Ahrens.
Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Karen Calisterio, and I am the state chair of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Idaho, also known as RLCID. RLCID believes this legislation before you today is the most critical piece of legislation to have come before the Idaho legislature in decades, if not in all of history, and deserves due diligence and consideration. After reviewing the health care legislation and listening to the hours of recorded testimony before the governor's study group by respected think tanks such as ALEC, the Cato Institute, and others, we feel it is indisputable that this legislation serves as a trigger that will subject over 200,000 Idahoans and thousands of small businesses to the ravages of the federal mandate, an IRS enforceable penalty that is only enforceable through a state exchange. It cannot be enforced through a federal exchange. It is a falsehood that a state exchange provides state control. A state exchange is subject to the rules and regulations set forth by HHS. These rules are still being written and are currently over several thousand pages and growing. Passing this legislation now without knowing all the rules and cost is irresponsible at best. RLCID sees no credible excuse for rushing this legislation and not waiting until all factors are known. The legislature does not have a deadline, and due diligence would dictate that no legislation be passed at this time. If a state exchange is the right thing to do, it will still be the right thing to do at a later date when all the rules and costs are known. As representatives of the people of Idaho, you have a duty to stand in the gap for the people, to protect them in the same manner you would hopefully protect your own children and grandchildren. Most of us would not advise our children to engage in such reckless behavior. We've heard proponents of the legislation tout states' rights and having a seat at the table. But all evidence suggests this legislation surrenders all states' rights and its passage strips Idaho of its legal standing to sue, since Idaho would willfully be participating by setting up its own exchange. Do you really want to have a seat at the table of tyranny? Do you want to be responsible for the potential destruction of Idaho? There are way too many unknowns at this time, too many to make a responsible decision. If you must err, we ask you to please err on the side of caution. There is nothing to gain and everything to lose by passing this legislation right now. Your duty is not to protect special interests. Your duty is not to protect insurance lobbyists. Your duty is to protect the people of Idaho. The decision you make today will live long in the memory of the people of Idaho. So please do the right thing and vote no on this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Calistero. Appreciate your comments very much. After Danielle Ahrens will be John Colson.
Chairman Wood, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Christine Tiddens. I'm the Public Policy Coordinator for Catholic Charities of Idaho and a representative for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Idaho. I'm here today to express our support of House Bill 248 and the establishment of a state-based exchange. Our goal in advocating for this bill is to promote affordable, high-quality coverage for all people in Idaho. A state-based exchange that improves the accessibility of affordable health insurance is in the best interest of Idaho and the state's low and middle-income families. As people of faith, we do believe that human life from conception to natural death must be protected. It is this foundational belief which has led Catholic Charities of Idaho, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Idaho, Catholic Charities USA, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and a multitude of other groups to vigorously and publicly oppose federal mandates that require health insurance plans to cover contraception, abortion, and abortion-inducing drugs. However, we recognize that these mandates can only be changed at the federal level. While we continue to work with our national partners to evaluate options available at the federal level to address these unacceptable federal mandates, including urging support for the recently introduced Health Conscious Act of 2013, we also know that we need to take action now at the state level to protect the life of all vulnerable populations in Idaho, especially those who currently do not have access to affordable and life-saving health care. Federal law does allow states to prohibit coverage for elective abortions in their health insurance exchanges, and Idaho has already taken proactive measures to limit abortion coverage. With the establishment of a state-based exchange, Idaho will retain these types of opportunities to negotiate additional restrictions on plans offered through the state-based exchange, opportunities that may not be available if Idaho defers to a federal exchange. Our faith guides us to advocate for policies that protect life and dignity of all, including the unborn, including the poor and the vulnerable, and those who do not have access to health care. While we continue to advocate for change on the federal level to remove concerning mandates which violate our core values, we nonetheless believe that a state-based exchange will promote better values for the dollar, improve access to affordable health insurance, and will best meet the needs of Idahoans. Families in Idaho will have the option to take more responsibility for their health and their health care decisions, and more will have access to preventative care that saves lives. Idaho will have an insurance exchange one way or another, but it is up to you to decide whether Idaho will choose to establish a state-based exchange or do nothing and let the federal government take over. By crafting a state-based exchange, we will move one step closer to living in a society in which every person is accountable to and contributes to the common good and overall health of our great state. In this end, we urge you to support House Bill 248. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your time and, of course, dedication to Idaho. I'll stand if there's any questions.
Thank you so much. After John Colson will be Scott Levitt. Ms. Ahrens.
Good morning, Chairman Wood and committee members. I am Danielle Ahrens from Sandpoint, Idaho. I represent myself. I'm a member of Bonner County Republicans, Bonner County Republican Women, and the Farm Bureau. As a member of Idaho Republican Party and Idaho Farm Bureau, I support their official positions to oppose the health care exchange and not to act as an arm of Obamacare by enforcing this oppressive tax. I ask you to vote no on this bill, We Republicans will be watching how our representatives vote on this issue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ahrens. Appreciate it very much. Mr. Colson, and followed after Mr. Levitt will be Chad Inman. Sir, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Colson. I represent myself. Mr. Chairman and representatives of the committee, we hear a lot of things being said here. There will be an exchange, whether state or federal. Well, I submit that there is only going to be an exchange if you do not do your job. Mr. Chairman, you asked that we separate this as one issue, but we can't. This is one part of Obamacare. We also hear that this is the law of the land and that the Supreme Court upheld this. Well, if you look at the Constitution, the Supreme Court does not have the power of judicial review. In Marbury versus Madison, they both declared that they did not have that according to the Constitution, and that they did have it because they should. It is the state's responsibility to stand in that gap. I urge you to look up Marbury versus Madison and read the context of what was said. That the federal government has the right to determine what authority they have is absurd. That is like having a father preside over his daughter's divorce. It makes no sense. It never has. I also urge you to look up the Kentucky resolutions of 1798, I believe. Section 1 and Section 8, Thomas Jefferson talked about nullification and how it is the state's right and duty to nullify any evil encroachments by the federal government. Obamacare in its entirety is an evil encroachment by the federal government. The legislation pushed it through, the executive pushed it through, and the United States Supreme Court upheld it with a power they don't have. The U.S. Constitution does not declare who has the final right of saying whether it is constitutional or not. In the absence of that declaration in the United States, it would default to those who gave the power to the federal government to begin with. In other words, the state has the final say. It is time for the states to start stepping up against this evil encroachment by the federal government and declare your authority. As the states gave the power to the federal government, the states determine what that power is. With all due respect, representatives, it is your duty to protect us from the evil encroachment from the federal government. I ask that you do that duty. I ask that you vote no on this bill and that you move forward to nullifying Obamacare. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colson. Appreciate it very much. After Chad Inman will be Joseph Romer III, I believe. Mr. Levitt.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Scott Levitt. I'm the past president of the Idaho Association of Health Underwriters and also their legislative chair. We represent health insurance agents, brokers, and consultants in the state of Idaho. We represent over 1,000 health insurance professionals. We, like others, are opposed to Obamacare, but it has been upheld by the Supreme Court. It is the law of the land. The piece of the provision we're looking at here, the issue at hand, is whether we have a state-based exchange or a federal exchange, and we would support the creation of a state-based exchange. We believe that if we have an Idaho state-based exchange, Idahoans will have more affordable options and more affordable choices to buy and purchase their health insurance. We also know that small businesses will have the ability to better control the cost of these options here in the state of Idaho. It will also give employees the ability to pick the products that best meet their individual needs and the needs of their employees. It will also allow Idahoans to qualify for premium assistance in purchasing their plans through a state-based exchange. To answer a previous question that was asked about personal health information, in 2014, the federal law states that medical underwriting will no longer exist with the exception of age and smoking status. So there will be no more gathering of personal health information, whether we have an exchange in a federal or a state-based, to answer a previous question. If we have a federal exchange, we feel that health insurance carriers and agents might not be a part of the process. If the federal government will then choose whether agents can exist to help their clients purchase and service their insurance needs, and also whether we'll have choices with what carriers that can operate inside of a federal exchange. Also, if we have a federal exchange, we know that it'll cost more. As previously mentioned, it will cost a 3.5% tax, which will cost the state of Idaho an additional $21 million to run a federal exchange over a state-based exchange. We also feel that once again, because of a federal exchange, health insurance agents will be going out of business. There'll be a loss of jobs to the industry, there'll be a loss of jobs to Idaho, and also a loss of income and state tax revenue. Finally, we feel that if we have a federal exchange, Idaho will lose regulatory oversight on the regulation of insurance in the state of Idaho. That will be deferred now to the federal government to be able to regulate and make those decisions. So once again, the issue at hand is not whether we have an exchange at all, but whether we have a state-based exchange where we have choices, accountability, and regulatory authority, or we default to a federal exchange where we lose all those powers. So we ask you to please support this bill to create a state-based exchange. I stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Levitt. Mr. Chad Inman, followed by Joseph Romer, and then Margaret Henbest.
Good morning, Chairman, representatives. We all seem to have questions regarding the sensibilities of embracing Obamacare. A very large stack of papers you've seen, 2,000 pages plus the 700 additional pages that were presented on Friday, last Friday. It's been compared in this room to a small stack, a little pamphlet that was created by the people, the Constitution. And it was created defining the federal government's role. The presumed question before us today is whether to create a state-run, federally controlled health insurance exchange or let the feds do it. The feds already have a state health insurance exchange up and running in the state of Idaho. Let's look at what has been written since the passage of the 2,000-plus page PACA law through the reconciliation process to become federal law. What has been written? The Scottus report, the Supreme Court of the United States, their decision, Farm Bureau's resolution, Idaho GOP chairman, and numerous lawmakers have come out opposed to this legislation. Let's look at what has not been written. For instance, which law enforcement agency in Idaho is going to enforce the collection of a tax for something that was not purchased? Is it county, state, or city? In the Examiner editorial, Obamacare's new tax on health insurance, December 3rd, 2012, I'm going to read. It states, buried deep within the rules is a 3.5% user fee, that is tax on premiums from health plans sold for Obamacare's soon-to-be-established federal exchanges. This tax comes above and beyond Obamacare's $100 billion excise tax on insurers. This article goes on to state, it was always understood that the federal government would have to create and operate exchanges in states that do not, but no one bothered through this reconciliation law of Obamacare to include a method for funding these federal exchanges. This is a problem. We need solutions, not more problems. I need to express the need for free market solutions in many areas, not just this area. Please look for those solutions and be receptive to those ideas presented. I ask you look at the plastic surgery industry when it comes to healthcare. In addition to that, plans like Dr. Fennick's plan, the People Power plan. I know we had an opportunity to sit down with you, Chairman, and see if you would allow us to present some information to the committee regarding other options. You declined. And I hope that you all choose to vote no on this bill for our children's sake.
Thank you, Mr. End. Appreciate it very much. After Representative Henbest will be Mr. Ripley. Mr. Romer.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Joe Roner. I live in Boise County. I am a free market capitalist in every sense of the term. I speak against this measure and urge that it die in this committee. I am deeply disappointed that Obamacare is being championed by none other than Governor Butch Otter, who has always held himself out to be a supporter of individual liberty and economic freedom. Mr. Otter owns Otter Care. Mr. Otter's rush to judgment to implement a state health care exchange, in my view, is totally disingenuous. While half the states fight valiantly on to defend Obamacare, to defeat Obamacare, and all of its unknown horrors, Mr. Otter prepares to hand over total control of health care in Idaho to big government and big insurance. These conditions, according to world-renowned free market economist Dr. Thomas Sowell, define fascism. I quote, "Unlike communists, the fascists did not seek government ownership of the means of production. They just wanted government to call the shots as to how business would be run." Thomas Sowell, Valentine's Day 2008. I quote, "Fascism should be more properly called corporatism because it is the merger of state and corporate power." Benito Mussolini. How's that working out for you, Benny? By signing such a bill now under consideration, Governor Butch Otter Care Otter is ordering the people of Idaho to accept fascism over freedom. One way or another, he will surely fail. Fascism is fatally incompatible with a constitutional republic. Those of you who vote for this bill will, by your actions, forever brand yourself as fascists. All of you who do so will face the wrath of the voters at the next election. Mr. Otter will be at the top of the list for removal from office. I promise you that. Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments today. Representative Henbest, good to see you back. After Mr. Ripley will be Lowell Fenwick. I would caution each of you. I realize that everybody's feelings here are running high. I respect everybody's stance on this issue. They are deeply held, but let's be careful about getting to the point where we have personal, what may be considered by some people as personal attacks. So again, we're doing very well today. We'll certainly get everybody heard today. Just a note of caution. Thank you so much. Representative Henbest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Margaret Henbest, and I'm the Executive Director of Nurse Leaders of Idaho. The Nurse Leaders of Idaho is a professional membership organization which represents the unified and the collective voice of nursing leadership throughout Idaho. Its diversified membership includes nurse executives and managers, nursing program directors, deans, and professors, as well as leaders from public health, industry, advanced practice, and regulation. It's one of the largest nursing organizations in Idaho. My message is short and succinct. Nurse leaders of Idaho understand that the health of Idahoans is influenced by their ability to afford and utilize healthcare services in both a timely, affordable, and appropriate manner. There's substantial research evidence, and I don't need to bore you with the details of that, that shows that health outcomes are better for those who have insurance coverage than for those who lack adequate coverage. Nurse Leaders of Idaho supports policies which promote access to affordable coverage and care. In House Bill 248, there is a provision for the creation of a state-based exchange that will help connect individuals and small businesses with affordable health insurance coverage. Idaho has one of the lowest insurance rates in the nation, and a state exchange may help to preserve that by avoiding additional federally imposed premium taxes. A state health exchange may also retain Idaho's voice in health reform, as well as ensuring that the exchange itself is held accountable in a transparent manner for the citizens of Idaho. Because the exchange is transparent, because it provides for an additional voice, and because it may be a more affordable avenue for Idaho, Nurse Leaders of Idaho ask for your support for House Bill 248 and thanks you for your service to Idaho.
Thank you, Representative. Next, Mr. Ripley. After Lowell Fenwick will be Stacy Satterley.
Mr. Chairman, I have a handout for the committee.
If you would just put it on the desk right there, and it will be put in their folder afterwards. We're collecting all of the input, and they'll be scanned into electronic format, and then all of that will be given to each member of the committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm David Ripley. I'm Executive Director of Idaho Chooses Life. I rise to oppose House Bill 248. The fundamental problem with the legislation is that it implements Obamacare. The so-called Affordable Care Act has already built a pile of broken promises guaranteed to get larger as the entire law takes root. But there are others here who can address many of those issues, particularly the horrendous financial burdens associated with this attempt to revamp American society and its economy. I will concentrate on the grave threat this federal legislation poses to the sanctity of human life. In the interest of time, I will just summarize the points made by the Board of Directors of Idaho Chooses Life in the resolution, which you don't have yet, but is in the pile here. A stated insurance exchange is the fundamental building block of Obamacare. Buried within the federal legislation is a river of tax money to subsidize the abortion industry, as well as abortions themselves. The Affordable Care Act also contains provisions for a 15-member panel with enormous potential to ration health care for the elderly and disabled. The federalization of health care poses a serious threat to conscience rights of health care professionals, as well as taxpayers, employers, and churches. That became evident from the Obama mandate to provide free abortifacients. We fear it is but the beginning of an assault on the First Amendment and our religious liberties. We also see an unprecedented threat to personal liberty by the collection of massive amounts of personal and intimate family data. Neither the ACA nor the bill before you provides reasonable safeguards to protect the religious and personal liberties of those who use an exchange to purchase insurance, whether freely or under coercion. There are those who claim that the ACA is now the law of the land and that we must submit. If we are compliant, perhaps our new federal masters will allow us to make helpful suggestions from time to time, curb one excess or another. To that, I would answer that the existing Medicaid program offers all the evidence we need of what we can reasonably expect as willing participants in a partnership. I would also submit that the ACA is not yet the law of the land. Not this land, anyway. It will not become the law of Idaho until and unless the Idaho legislature sanctions it and legitimizes it. Of course, you are not responsible for the specific provisions of Obamacare, but make no mistake about this legislation before you today. Your vote for House Bill 248 enables it to become the law of Idaho. You will thereby become responsible for the federal rules as they exist today and whatever outrageous things Secretary Sebelius decides to impose upon Idaho citizens in the months and years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Ripley.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Mr. Fenwick, and then after Mr. Fenwick, Steve Pugmire.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this opportunity. Good morning, representatives. As I look around at the people sitting before me, a lot of you are in the professions where we have a responsibility that is granted to us by our position to advise people who depend on us. And as a physician, as you are yourself, and certainly Representative Rushi, I made an oath that number one, that I would do no harm. And I believe that that general principle applies whether you are a lawyer or a insurance or financial advisor. First thing we need to do is to have the proper fiduciary and moral responsibility to look carefully at any directions where we're going to lead the people who trust us. Where we are now is a very difficult position because we do not have the information that we need in order to properly advise those who are looking to us for this leadership. The reason for that, of course, is many of the regulations have not been written, and of course we got another 700 of them last Friday, and I don't think there's anybody among us who can say that we understand how far this cliff is that we're being asked to leap over. The other difficulty is of the information that we have, we found out that a lot of that is untrustworthy. We find, for example, statements such as if we do not accept this responsibility of establishing a state exchange, we will default to a federal exchange, as if that doesn't already exist. As you probably know, as of last year, the Department of Health and Services instituted essentially federal exchanges who are responsible for managing Medicare and Medicaid services, which are in all effect the same as a federal exchange, with the exception that it doesn't have the website. We also told that this is the law of the land, and of course, as has been said before, the Supreme Court judgment was very narrow as to the taxing authority, but certainly specified that that the federal government does not have the authority to enforce the power of what kind of health care people have. That remains and will always be a state's right under our Constitution. As we look at the threats before us, we find that a lot of them are insubstantial, but if we look at the opportunities as well, there are opportunities that are granted to us by the federal government who would like for us to be able to support the bill, and those opportunities are also made to the insurance companies as well as to the hospital industries. Those opportunities are unsustainable, and we need to recognize that many of these are in order to get the ends of providing the support that the state needs. So I think with all of those, I would appreciate it if we would delay any decision until we've had a chance to look at the threats and opportunities, look at the alternatives. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fenwick. Appreciate your testimony very much. After Mr. Pugmire will be Steve Thomas. Go ahead.
Good morning, Chairman Wood and members of the committee. My name is Stacy Satterley, and I'm here representing the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network as their State Director of Government Relations. ACS Can is a member of the Idaho Health Exchange Alliance, one of 535 businesses, individuals, and organizations all working together to support a state-led health exchange. I appreciate the opportunity today to make a few brief remarks in support of the transparent, user-friendly, state-based health exchange created by House Bill 248. Health insurance exchanges are online marketplaces intended to make health insurance options clearer and more competitive. This is because individuals and small businesses can make better purchasing decisions if they have access to information necessary to compare health plans, resulting in a more transparent and competitive health insurance marketplace. A health insurance exchange lays out health insurance options for easy comparison, explaining plans in terms of benefits and costs. State-based exchanges also have the potential to help states improve access to health coverage, foster competition among health insurers, and increase consumer choice. Additionally, and importantly, the creation of a health insurance exchange will significantly increase access to coverage for those currently uninsured. If crafted correctly, Idaho will be better served by an exchange designed by and for Idahoans as opposed to an exchange imposed by the federal government. An added benefit for all Idahoans is that a state-based health exchange saves money. The cost of operating a state-based health insurance exchange will be significantly less expensive than a federal health exchange. The total annual taxes paid by Idaho consumers to cover operational costs of a federal exchange would be approximately $36.4 million, and that is money that would go to the federal government, whereas a state-based exchange will cost approximately $21 million, which goes back into the private sector here in the state. An insurance exchange built with the best interests of Idahoans in mind would mean increased access to health care coverage, which translates into earlier detection and better outcomes for those fighting cancer and reduced costs for all. The exchange must be transparent and user-friendly for the consumer so that anyone looking for coverage can readily compare costs, benefits, provider networks, prescription drug formularies, Cost-sharing details and other important information for all plans offered, and we appreciate the work that has been done to add transparency to the exchange. We are pleased to see three consumer interests represented on the Exchange Governance Board. Having a balanced governance board is critical to ensuring its decisions serve the best interests of consumers, patients, workers, and small employers in the exchange. Finally, the health insurance marketplace needs to have a level playing field, so all insurance companies are playing by the same rules and paying the same fees, whether or not they are part of the exchange. Thank you again for the opportunity to stand in support of House Bill 248, a state-based health exchange.
Thank you, Ms. Satterley. Appreciate your testimony very much. After Steve Thomas will be Dale Pierce. Mr. Pugmire.
Mr. Chairman and Representatives, I'm out of breath. I had to go feed my parking meter.
That's quite all right.
I had
We
2
do that
minutes
all the
left
time,
on
too.
my parking meter. Appreciate your time this morning, and I think I have some issues that I believe have not been raised up to this point. I listened to Chief of Staff Hensley report on their view of the bill, HB 248, where it would be financially self-supporting. But there was no mention of whether the appointed board members are going to serve pro bono, or are they going to be salaried? That's one issue itself. The other issue is the question was brought about if the state can avoid liability by this formation of the state exchange board. And my question to you is, if in fact there are 3 legislators sitting on the board, how can it be possible to avoid liability when state legislatures are sitting on the board? The other thing that Mr. Hensley mentioned earlier in a Senate committee was this board had the power and the right to sue and be sued. That poses a potential litigation nightmare where, in fact, if the cost of litigation has no place to receive its funding except from the premium payers of the health insurance exchange. So with every piece of litigation, there's a potential raise in premium for those who are in the exchange. Now, I would also ask the question, if it is not a state-controlled monopoly, as they claim it is not, and yet there are 3 members of the legislature sitting on the board, that brings up the question of potential lawsuit there. And the final thought I'd like to present to you today is, remember the passage of the universal identification by the federal government. Several states, including Idaho, said we are not going to participate in that. And yet we have had people represent the cause today that it's going to be a federal law, it's going to happen, whether we like it or not. And yet the state of Idaho was able to stand up and say, no, we're not going to participate in universal identification. So it was rejected by Idaho. I'm sorry, my time's up. There's the wolf issue, which we also rejected, but I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Pugmire. Those are issues that haven't been brought up before, and we really appreciate that very much. Thank you so much. After Dale Pierce will be Craig Campbell. Mr. Thomas.
Chairman Wood, members of the committee, my name is Steve Thomas. I'm here today on behalf of my client, the Idaho Association of Health Plans, which is a state trade association comprised of the major health insurance companies doing business here in Idaho, some based here and some based outside of Idaho. Most are not-for-profit companies. Mr. Hensley, Mr. Richards, and Mr. Levitt have already made many important points, which I will not repeat, but simply incorporate by reference. Instead, let me say this. 248 is an omnibus bill, which keeps getting stronger. 1042 was strong. 179 strengthened it further. And then there was additional input from the group of 16, which strengthened it even more. Members of this committee, this bill has roots nearly 2 years ago when I started drafting one of the bill's many ancestors. Since then, the bill has had many, many contributing authors. There is strength in numbers. A healthy blend of wisdom and pragmatics is rooted in a base so broad. If one looks at all of the changes that went into this bill over the many past months, making it stronger, more fair, more inclusive, it can truly be said now that at long last, we all have a stake in this bill's success. Virtually everyone in this room, including some of the critics of earlier versions of the bill, have contributed to the changes which have improved the bill. So what is the bill about now? Is it about health insurance? Not so much, not anymore. There is a broad consensus that Idaho has enjoyed some of the lowest insurance costs in the nation. The bill really isn't seeking to fix a broken Idaho insurance industry. Is the bill about exchanges? Well, not so much. It's an old idea dating back for thousands of years, including the New York Stock Exchange and others. Travelocity with computers in the 20th century, and in October of 2006, the Heritage Foundation published a paper which supported the notion of a health insurance exchange. So what really is it about here today? The word sovereignty seems to be the essence of the debate, and I submit to you that before you vote, read Section 1. It has a very nice nutshell summarizing all of the things about sovereignty. And I submit to you that ordered liberty and sovereignty do go together. They are supported by this bill, and we urge you to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. After Craig Campbell will be Ray Stark. Mr. Pierce.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I teach a Sunday school class for 2-year-olds to 3-year-olds, and they only give me about 3 minutes of understanding, of comprehension.
They'll probably understand more than we do.
Thank you. Let me show you my picture. This is FDR with his little dog, his little Scotty dog. This is a monument, I believe, in Washington, D.C. I've never seen it, but it says, "They who seek to establish systems of governance based on the regimentation of all human beings by a handful of individual rulers call this a new order. It's not new, and it's not order." Perhaps some of you have been able to see this flow chart. This was made by the United States Congress and also a senator joining in, Senator Sam Brownback, and also Congressman Kevin Brady. And this is a flow chart that shows some of the new federal agencies that will be attached to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. There are 159 new federal agencies. How did they come up with that? I don't know, but if it's from government, it's got to be good. Except this only shows 30% of them. They got tired. They said, we're done. We're going to wash our hands of this, which I think is the same thing that the great state of Idaho should do, is we should wash our hands of this. Just over 2 years ago, the governor of the great state of Idaho came back to Idaho after appearing on Judge Andrew Napolitano's show, and he said Idaho would be the first state to nullify the Patient and Protection Affordable Care Act, or what we commonly refer to as Obamacare. That didn't happen. And the 3 bills that went through the legislature, the third one was finally even vetoed by the governor. So there are some things happening there that none of us are really proud of. I call this an exchange as a question, or a blind date with a pig. 2 weeks ago, Senate Bill 1042 passed out of committee and passed on to the Senate floor. You probably noticed how many of the senators felt they had to make a clarifying statement before casting their vote. They confessed they didn't like the bill, it was flawed, and they felt coerced into voting for it. Well, what a legacy that heaped upon their heads. Coerced to accept a federal mandate because it was the lesser of two evils. In no way does that exemplify upholding or defending the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, no matter how much lipstick applied to the snout of that sow. She's still a pig and will always be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. We appreciate it very much. We've obviously, since the Senate debate, have tried to refrain from reference to animals, but anyway. Sir, the podium is yours, and after Ray Stark will be Ronald Linsman.
Chairman Wood, members of the committee, I appreciate your time. Today, my name is Craig Campbell. I'm here representing my bride, who encouraged me to come down here, as well as a couple of my neighbors. And when I say you this morning, I'm not trying to be insulting to you as a group of people or in blame, but just to refer to the legislative process. But the people that put you where you are today are citizens and not organizations. When organizations come to you, they are seeking their advantage. When I come to you as a citizen, I am seeking your protection. When you passed the Idaho Healthcare Freedom Act as citizens, we just applauded our legislature and our government. We thought finally that people knew how we felt and they were going to stand up and protect us. And you know, I wasn't aware that one man was given veto power over legislation in the state. When you say the Attorney General doesn't think this applies anymore. Well, I'm going to read just a short section of it because I think these words apply. It's hereby declared that the public policy of the state of Idaho, consistent with our constitutionally recognized and inalienable rights of liberty, is that every person within the state of Idaho is and shall be free to choose or decline to choose any mode of securing health care services without penalty or threat of penalty. You know, I read that and I say that is our law. If you want to go with this Health Care Act, I think you need to repeal this law because that's what you're doing. You'll be putting something in pose of that. You also, as a group of people, you know, are not compelled to do what the federal government states. In Mack and Prince versus United States, they declared the executive officers of the state were not required to carry out the orders of a federal government. You do not have that compulsion. It's also hard for me to figure out in the state of Idaho, where we're thankful to have a balanced budget, that we would consider taking $20 million from the federal government, where 40 cents on every one of those dollars is borrowed, as an economically sound practice. That's not what this state is really about. And the last thing I tell you is I worked for Boise Cascade Corporation when they had timberlands for 20 years. And I ran the IT services group for the forestry group, and we ran anywhere from 6 million acres at one point in time to 2.1 million acres. That transacted when we finally sold all that for $1.65 billion. So I know a little bit of something about managing money and things like that. And we never spent more than $1 million a year, much less $20 million in a year, to maintain an IT infrastructure. Something is decidedly wrong. And if I came in to my bosses proposing, as you've heard today, what we think the possible costs are, and had gone into the boardroom, I'd have been laughed out of the room. And I think you should laugh this bill out of existence. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your testimony very much. Next is Ray Stark, and then after Ronald Lee Linsman will be Dan Roberts. Go ahead,
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ray Stark with the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce. Imagine for a moment yourself in the chamber's shoes after the Affordable Health Care Act passes. We are a complex organization of 1,900 voluntary members in providing jobs for 80,000 Idahoans. But what chambers do best is to get their membership together to review a public policy issue. So imagine yourself a few years ago being around a table that incorporates these members of the chamber: hospitals, insurance providers, home health agencies, pharmaceutical companies, health education, rehabilitation service companies, physicians, dental services, medical equipment companies, health associations, and of course, as always, small business. During this advisory board's recommendation or review of this exchange issue, it was mentioned that an online marketplace for individuals and small business is a good idea and should be established whether there's federal legislation or not. Different segments of the healthcare industry disagree, and you can imagine that group that I just mentioned to you. But on this particular issue, it was unanimous support to the Chamber Board of Directors for a state exchange. It's interesting how the issue of health insurance exchange has become so divisive. Fundamentally, as I mentioned earlier, and simply stated, an online marketplace for individuals and small business to shop for health insurance should have happened years ago. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we ask you to support House Bill 248 and send it to the floor with a due pass. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. After Dan Roberts will be Elizabeth Kreiner. Ronly Linsman, please, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman and committee. Thankful for the opportunity to be here this morning. You know, if this healthcare exchange was such a simple, mere, easy exchange, why is there the provisions for the navigators? What an interesting term, that we will have to have navigators help us through all of this simple, easy website. This is not just another bill in the history of Idaho or the nation. This is very pivotal to the future of our nation. And I just also want to assert what the previous speaker said about our Health Care Protection Act. Did they not consult with the Attorney General when they passed that? Did they think it was just going to be a worthless piece of words that had no effect on anything? Did we pound our chest and bare our teeth and pretend like we were going to do something as a sovereign state just to turn around and knuckle under? And I would submit to you, if you go and check some of the some of the articles in some of the Washington News where they're referring to Obama, or to Otter, excuse me for the switch there. They're referring to Otter in Idaho. We are being used as the poster child for the Republicans acquiescing to this mess. Remember when Obama came to Idaho and we were used as the poster child then for this great, wonderful Republican state loving Obama? It was shocking, and I found it, and then also on the religious objection, the first court case, the Obama lawyers argued that it was a compelling government interest that they could not allow businesses to try to use the anti-abortion, their principled religious position on not supporting that. And they also went on to say that they couldn't allow businesses to have just free reign in that because, end quote, it would be an abuse of religion. Imagine if you're one of those small businesses and you hold that conviction, and then his attorneys come and tell you, hey, you're abusing religion, so just get over it. So I do not want Idaho to accept this. If Obama wants to play dictator, let him play dictator. Let Idaho be a refuge. Let Idaho stand up with the rest of the Republicans across this nation. Don't let us be the poster child for the Republicans knuckling under. And again, if it's just some simple little website, then I suggest you vote against this. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate that very much. After Elizabeth Kreiner will be Duncan Ferris.
Chairman, representatives, thanks for your time today. Wanted to come up with some kind of an Obama joke to lighten things up here, but couldn't come up with them fast enough. So maybe we could all just laugh, just in spite of not having a joke. I'm representing the SOS Foundation of Eastern Idaho. I'm here today to make one last plea in my quest to keep Obamacare from destroying my liberty, the liberty of my country, state, and nation. Dependence is anathema to liberty. I am an independent person. I own my own business. I work hard to provide for my family of 12. I don't take welfare, even though I could easily qualify for many of the programs. I believe that if you are dependent, you are not free. I want to remain independent and free. But the state exchange will make it harder for me and impossible for most to do that. I currently have insurance, but because of Obamacare, I will see my rates double as a result of insurance companies being forced to cover pre-existing illness. I cannot afford to pay double. But I do not believe in the principle of legalized plunder either. So I will not go to the exchange to purchase insurance in order to receive discounts and subsidies that others are paying for. We are leaving no real economic choice for many who want to remain independent and free. This state exchange really isn't about health insurance at all, but it will ensure that Idahoans lose their rugged independence as personal data is used to addict them to subsidized everything. Idaho needs strong citizens, not dependent citizens. Dependency leads to bondage. Obamacare leads to bondage. Dependent people think in dichotomies. They say, we have no choice here. We are going to have an exchange. However, a free people think outside the box and have no limitations to solutions. If you support, I ask you today, if you support this exchange and feel that we must acquiesce to this clearly unconstitutional and immoral law, does this decision spring from a paradigm of liberty or dependence? If you're planning on voting yes, I'm betting it is the latter. I'm also betting that things will not get better as you might think, but will continue to get a lot worse because of this choice to create an exchange. Our founders were asked a similar question about acquiescing to tyranny. They answered it thus: what is it that gentlemen would wish? What would they have? Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. Although it is quite apparent that we are being acted upon because of our dependence, it is not too late to turn the tide and say no to dependence, no to socialism, no to Obamacare by first saying no to the state-run health exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Appreciate your comments very much. Next is Ms. Kreiner. After Ms. Kreiner will be Duncan Ferris, and then Mr. Esquivel. Go ahead, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Elizabeth Kreiner, and I'm here today on behalf of the Idaho State Dental Association, and we represent a little more than 800 practicing and licensed dentists here in the state of Idaho. Our membership spent quite a bit of time in looking at the federal health reform law, both as dentists and as small business owners, and how the law will or will not impact their business and their practice. And as the state has looked at the issue of a state exchange versus a federal exchange versus a partnership exchange, we have again reviewed and looked at the proposals that the task force looked at, that the governor appointed, and the process prior to that and since that. We've looked at a lot of legislative proposals and believe that the bill that you've put together today is a good bill. It's a state exchange. It'll be a location where individuals can choose to purchase health insurance in Idaho. They can choose. It's not mandated. And it's a place that will provide information so that those individuals and small businesses can make an educated and informed choice on their health care. We think that's important. What it is not an endorsement of the federal act. It is not an endorsement of Obamacare. And we realize that while difficult, and while many of our members don't appreciate all of the components of the federal law, that at the end of the day, we would far rather deal with Idahoans developing an Idaho-based exchange and helping us to take care of our insurance needs, should they choose to use that state exchange. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Ferris, go ahead, sir, please. After Mr. Esquivel will be Tony Lawson. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Duncan Ferris. I represent myself. Back in September 1959, a good Idaho farm boy by the name of Mr. Ezra Benson had grown up and become the Secretary of Agriculture in the Dwight D. Eisenhower administration. And at that time, he was tasked with ushering the Soviet dictator at that time, Nikita Khrushchev, around several Iowa farms in the Midwest. And during the course of that visit, the communists basically smugly told Mr. Benson that one day his grandchildren would live under communism. And after Mr. Benson confidently assured him that he would do everything in his power to make sure that his grandchildren and everyone's grandchildren lived under liberty and freedom, Khrushchev basically laughed at him and said, "You Americans are so gullible. We'll feed you small doses of socialism until one day you wake up and you already have communism." And so here we are, over 50 years later, Mr. Benson's grandchildren. And we're making a decision about principles, whether they're American principles or communist principles. And I think it's very appropriate, Mr. Chairman, that you had mentioned that this room was going to be named the Abraham Lincoln Room. President Lincoln said, we the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution. And if we implement this, we decide here in Idaho to implement a state exchange, we're helping to put that keystone in the arch of communism that Vladimir Lenin said was socialized medicine. And so I hope you would keep that in mind. Please remember our American heritage, our American principles. Remember that we're Americans. And uphold and defend the Constitution and protect the Constitution of the United States. I'm grateful for the opportunity to stand here before you and to stand for liberty and freedom and to stand for the Constitution. And I hope that you will do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris, for coming today. We really appreciate that very much. Mr. Esquibel, and then after Tony Lawson, we will take about a 4 to 5 minute break to allow the committee to stretch and to run to the bathroom for a moment. And then I'll have a couple of names just before Ms. Lawson comes to let you know who's going to be up as soon as we get back from the break. Please, sir, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Milt Esquibel. I'm with Citizens of Idaho. We're the only unincorporated nonprofit association here in the state of Idaho that protects the sovereignty of the state as well as the people of the state. One of the things that I've heard here today is power corrupts the federal government. What's the definition of federal? Well, it's a league. What is the definition of a league? It's called conspiracy. When you look at this and you understand the true words, I've heard a lot of instances here about the Idaho Health Freedom Act, what it actually does. Most people don't realize that the Idaho Health Freedom Act is the only act that is done to the constitutional state of Idaho. In other words, where it says the state, that only means constitutional state of Idaho. What you're doing is in this state. That is the corporate jurisdiction of the corporate state of Idaho when it came in 1890. 1890, Idaho came in as an organized territory as well as an incorporated business. Currently, right now, I stand in front of a corporate seal of the state of Idaho. Everybody in this room under the Administrative Procedures Act is a corporation according to 340402 of the definition of corporate name. Everything that they're doing here today is totally legal under the color of law, but it's totally illegal and unlawful under the rule of law. Now, Milgram's experiment in 1963 in Yale proved that power corrupts. In 1971, they wanted to do another study, so Stanford took it over, and it's called the Zimbardo experiment. And it shows that government corrupts. That's where we're at today. The state-based exchange, again, is totally legal. It's not lawful, but it's totally legal. Most of us don't understand that. One of the things we have to understand is that everything that you're doing here is done under a corporate agency. In other words, the corporate jurisdiction of the state of Idaho, okay? The main thing that we have to understand is the interpretive rulemaking in the state. Under the Administrative Procedure Act, you're able to make laws under color of law that violate the Constitution. So I put it to you folks, and I'm going to leave this at the end. In 1787, Jefferson simply wrote to Edward Carrington, "The people must keep an eye on you and I, Congress, assemblies, judges, and governor." And the reason why is because they all shall become wolves. Currently, Governor Otter has done the worst thing for our state. The legislation that has taken place is also the worst thing done for our state, because when you enter into a compact, you enter into an agreement, a commercial agreement, again, which the state of Idaho is currently working at. Thank you for your time, and I ask you to vote no.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming today very much. Next is Tony Lawson. Go ahead, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Tony Lawson. I represent the Idaho Hospital Association as Vice President of Government Relations for that association. We represent over 45 community hospitals throughout the state, from small 10-bed hospitals in rural communities to large metropolitan hospitals in our larger areas. Our hospitals also employ almost 25,000 Idahoans around the state. A poll was mentioned earlier in someone's testimony that the Idaho Hospital Association had done, so I will leave copies of that polling for the committee. It clearly shows a vast majority of Idahoans in favor of moving forward with a state-based exchange across party line, across geographic area, all over the state. It is clear that the majority of Idahoans are in favor of the state taking the lead on this particular piece of the ACA. Hospitals face probably more regulatory burden than almost any industry in the state of Idaho. We deal with volumes and volumes of regulations from the state and federal level on a daily basis. And I can tell you from the experience of our hospitals, we know what it's like to deal with the threat feds through the state. And we will take that option every single time. We would much rather deal with the state agency implementing federal regulation than trying to get through to someone in Washington, D.C. or Maryland or Kansas City or wherever they have the call center. We will always work with our local agencies better. Will we always get the answer we want? Not always. But if Idahoans are in charge of the exchange, if Idahoans are designing the exchange, if Idahoans are working on the exchange, we will always have a better chance of having our voice heard, of having it work to the benefit of Idahoans, of having consumers' voices heard at the state level. We don't always like working with the government, but we always know which government we would rather work with. We will always choose Idaho over the feds every time. We urge your support for this piece of legislation.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson. On behalf of the committee, I want to thank everyone this morning for your decorum, et cetera. It's been wonderful. The committee, it's 5 minutes after. Let's certainly be back here in about 4 to 5 minutes. I would just keep your place unless you're going to go to the restroom or stretch your legs. And when we get back, first up will be Mr. Darrell Ford, then Mr. Brent Olmstead, and then Mr. Jeremy Piska. We're recessed for 5 minutes. Yeah, but I need them back, so.
No, I'll just run down, I'll make copies, and they'll be back under this before you start.
Okay, let's see. This one is done.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
You got 2 sheets.
Yeah, we got several sheets, and I need to keep.
You have them, so you ordered them.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we ordered them. We did them ourselves. Bring them right back. Thanks. How you doing? Okay. Yeah. At the end, you may have been one that left whether you wanted to testify or not blank, okay?
This is Idaho in Session, Legislature Live, the Auditorium Channel. Idaho in Session is sponsored by the Idaho State Broadcasters Association, the J.A. and Catherine Albertson Foundation, Union Pacific Foundation, Idaho Association of Counties, Idaho Cable Telecommunications Association, Association of Idaho Cities, and your contributions to the Idaho Public Television Endowment. This is Idaho in Session, Legislature Live, the Auditorium Channel. Idaho in Session is sponsored by the Idaho State Broadcasters Association, the J.A. and Catherine Albertson Foundation, Union Pacific Foundation, Idaho Association of Counties, Idaho Cable Telecommunications Association, Association of Idaho Cities, and your contributions to the Idaho Public Television Endowment.
Okay, committee, let's be getting back up here so we can get going on the rest of the testimony for today. What is going on here? There is no. Committee will be back in order. The next, next is Darrell Ford, and then after Darrell Ford will be Joe Igasquirza. And I'm sorry, he told me the last name, and I'm just butchering it. But anyway, and then after that will be Mr. Jeremy Piska. So, Mr. Ford.
Good morning, Chairman Wood and the rest of the committee. I appreciate being here. I'm a retired quality assurance specialist. I work for General Electric Space Systems Division, and my dealing was mostly in contracts. I don't know how many of you have seen the actual pages of the Affordable Care Act, but anything with so many subnotes is almost impossible to read. You need about 5 people to do it, and the rules that have come out are just as bad. It should be very simple, just like our Constitution, to read. It shouldn't be as cumbersome as it is. I was wondering. I watched what happened with the exchanges before with the Senate, and I kept hearing over and over again that we don't like this, we don't want it, but we're going to have it anyway, so I'm going to vote for it. And I understand from quite a few people that that's very infuriating. And I hope that something like that doesn't happen again. I hope you all actually get a chance to read the Affordable Care Act yourself and not allow somebody else to tell you what it is, so you understand. And I don't really, I hope this doesn't go through, just like Utah thought they had it in place to where they were going to have what they wanted to do with the health exchange, and it was returned to them with they needed more changes to it. They wanted them to have more, to add more to it. I think the same thing might happen with us if we turn in a state exchange that has to do with with something that the people could live with, or that you think we could live with. They will change anything they can, and that's been my experience with contracts. And that's about all I would like to say is that this is not a good bill, and putting lipstick on it won't make it any better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. We really appreciate you testifying today. Next is Joe. And, sir, I'll let you pronounce your last name for the record, if you would, please.
You betcha.
And the podium is yours,
nice
sir.
old Basco names.
Yes,
My
sir.
name is Joe Igasquirza. I live in Nampa. I'm a 66-year-old man. Now, I've heard other people stand up here before me getting up here that they represent. Time's up already.
No, sir. We'll call that operator error. Start over and go ahead.
That they represent 200 million people in their insurance organizations, or 25,000 people for this organization. I represent about 50 people that I have coffee with off and on throughout the week. I have not talked to one of them that wants to have something like this go through. And I had something written down here I wanted to tell you, but thank you very much for letting me speak. And I'm glad that all of you have been elected. I would like to point out that I am one of your employers. And I, speaking for myself, God bless you, and 50 other people that I know of, would like you to vote against this thing. I think that it's important for us to realize, most of us, and I think you do too, this isn't constitutional. It's something that's being shoved down our throats. We need to stand back, take our time. I think we have time. We don't have to rush into this. I think that's all I have to say, but I would like to thank you very much for allowing me to speak finally. And that, I'll not let that happen again.
Well,
I'll know better next time.
And sir, thank you for coming this morning. And if we skipped over you in error, I certainly apologize for that.
That was my bad. That was my bad. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it very much. Next will be Mr. Jeremy Piska. After Mr. Piska will be Mary Adler, and then Vicki Purdy. Mr. Piska.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much. I'm Jeremy Piska. I'm an attorney with the Risch Piska Law Firm here in Boise, and I'm here today very proudly representing St. Alphonsus Health Systems. St. Alphonsus, by way of background, has 4,800 employees within Idaho, 1,161 medical staff employees, and we've been in this valley for more than 120 years looking out and serving the community's needs. Every 3 years, the hospital engages in a community needs assessment, and every time we engage in one of those community needs assessments, there are certain issues that rise to the very top. One of those issues is access to affordable health care coverage. There are multiple studies that demonstrate that there are two factors that improve health care the most. Those are access to ongoing primary care and also access to health insurance. Why is that? Because timely access to care promotes wellness and the prevention of chronic disease and chronic disease management. It decreases those higher costs downstream, like ER visits and hospitalization. We do believe that the health insurance exchange, a state-based one, is a better option. And I would have to say that the best argument for why we should have a state-based exchange are the 200 people that are in this room. I commend the governor for taking the courage and the leadership and the role that he has, making the state-based health insurance exchange board an open process. Because of that, every one of these diverse opinions will continue to have their say. If you default to a federal exchange, I highly doubt we're all going to get on an airplane and go talk to faceless bureaucrats in Washington. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Piska. Mary Adler, then Vicki Purdy, and then Brent Olmstead. Mary?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, my name is Mary Adler. I'm from Grangeville, Idaho. I don't represent an organization. I'm a mom, a grandma. I represent myself. But there are like with many of us that have come in today, representing self, have broad communities. 3 weeks ago, I met with 114 people in Grangeville discussing numerous concerns that we had. Healthcare exchange was one that came up. Otter care came up right along with it. There were some very strong, and actually, I can honestly say out of 114 people, there wasn't a single person who disagreed with the stance and were not comfortable with this. In March of 2010, while speaking to the 2010 Legislative Conference on National Association of Counties, Nancy Pelosi made the following statement: "We have to pass this bill so you'll know what's in it," referring to Obamacare. Her statement was reflective of a massive effort in Washington to push through an agenda on the American people in an atmosphere of growing public opposition. Why such a massive push to ram this down America's throat? The original bill, now added pages, is an overwhelming monstrosity of documentation of rules, regulations, and taxation that is the most intrusive and overwhelming violation of the rights of Americans our country has ever experienced. The option for each state to establish a healthcare exchange is a matter of who will bear the burden of implementation and not the choice of which rules we have to follow, the mandated mile markers that are preset, and the federal intrusions in the lives of every man, woman, and child, which, by the way, won't necessarily come through the health exchange, but the healthcare exchange does provide an avenue for it to go through our healthcare providers, and that's a violation of people's trust with their care providers. Yes, many Idahoans from our state, having become aware of the details and regulations, are frightened and angry, and I feel rightly so. With the rising costs of goods, services, and taxations for support of this health care bill, this national health care bill, and if we adopt the health care exchange here in Idaho as well, employers will have to cut back on hours, pay, and jobs. I'm not saying this is 100%, but I think we all know where this money has to come from somewhere, and it's going to affect business. That buck gets passed to the consumer. Small businesses will struggle and some will fall. Taxes will increase, and some have already. And these are on families that are on the brink of losing their homes and their cars. And I know this from personal experience. We have no more margin. A loss of primary care providers, mainly doctors, individuals, will lose a huge portion of their rights to choose their medical care. Government does not have that right to take that away from us. There's more, but I'll close with, we know that there are 20 states still holding out, or actually maybe a few more, that are taking a stand to let's wait and see how this plays out. I'm not arguing we need a healthcare exchange and we need a healthcare overhaul, but I'm saying now is not the time. There's too many unknowns.
Thank you, Ms. Adler. Thank you very much. Next is Vicki Purdy, followed by Brent Olmsted, and then I think we've come to the end of the list of people who have signed up. However, there are a few people who did not fill in the blank of whether they wished to testify or not. Whether they wished to testify or not. I said I was nervous, okay? So after Mr. Olmsted, I will ask if there's anyone who has not had an opportunity to testify today, if they would wish to testify. And if you do, then after Mr. Olmsted, come up here in the front row, and then I'll call you up one at a time, and you can state your name and then testify. Ms. Purdy, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Chairman Wood, committee members, thank you for this opportunity to testify. My name is Vicki Purdy. I currently live in New Meadows. My husband and I have a ranch up there. I am also Adams County GOP chairman, and I echo the thoughts of our county committee. I just got back from Florida. If you don't think you can stand up to your governor, you can, because right under Danica Patrick, who is the story about Governor Scott and his expansion of Medicaid, and the Florida legislature is standing up to Governor Scott on that expansion. I've been buying health insurance for my family for 35 years. I wonder how many of the people that are involved in Obamacare and this bill have ever purchased and own their own policies. How many of you have ever actually bought your own policies, or have you worked for somebody that's provided your policies? Certainly it's been a long time since Governor Otter had to actually go and purchase his own policy of insurance. See, I've lost my place, sorry. Insurance companies, you have to shop every year to keep insurance companies honest. I don't support this bill, just in case you were wondering. They will rip you off if you let them. Every year you have to shop around. I am fortunate enough to have my insurance through our dairy co-op still, even though we aren't currently dairying. My husband and I have health savings accounts. Idaho is not price competitive. Our insurance right now is based out of New York. For the same policy, which is a health savings account, a family of $10,000 deductible, which they pay nothing on a health savings account until that $10,000 deductible is met, is $200 more if I purchase that in the state of Idaho versus in the state of New York. So for Senator Cameron and all those folks to say that it's competitive in Idaho, it is not competitive in Idaho. We need Idaho's market to get opened up. We need a free system here. We need everybody to be able to purchase it. Anybody can go online and find insurance. This bill has been to protect insurance companies and healthcare facilities, keep and increase the flow of dollars in Idaho. Don't insult Idahoans with the sense that this is good for Idaho. It creates another money-eating regulatory agency. The board further protects the health insurance monopolies and limits choices. The board will decide plans for consumers. They will decide what we need. Isn't that nice of them to make all our choices for us? After all, we consumers are just too incompetent to figure it out ourselves. Healthcare costs and insurance will increase. It always does with the hand of government. Those subsidized will overuse the system, and thus the entitlement program begins. It will never be self-sustaining, and once you pull the trigger, there will be no going back. You will hear all kinds of people whining, saying, oh my gosh, you can't take my health care away. This is my right. Well, it isn't their right. In this country, you have the right and opportunity to be responsible for yourself. People in other countries would love to have our rights, to make our own choices. The truth is, the very people you're trying to help, you will not help. It will make costs go so high that you will never be able to afford health insurance. But I think you guys already knew this. I don't think anybody that ran on a platform, any Republican ran on a platform of supporting Obamacare. In closing, I'd just like to make one more statement, taking the liberties from the Speaker of the House of Alaska that he made in a statement. Idahoans deserve less hassle, less dictator-style government, fewer incursions into their day-to-day lives, and more faith that their rights will be protected. I ask that you do that and not support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Purdy. Appreciate it very much. Mr. Olmstead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Brent Olmstead. I am a registered lobbyist with MP Idaho. I am here today representing a client, Milk Producers of Idaho. Milk Producers of Idaho is a dairy trade association comprised of dairies throughout the state of Idaho and associated businesses. And very few, if any, of the members of the Milk Producers of Idaho are in favor of the Affordable Care and Protection Act, Patient Protection Act. The board of directors for MPI reviewed literature and spoke to representatives from both sides of this issue. We had a firm that does accounting for most of the dairies in the state review it on a financial matter. We had our attorney look at it from a legal matter. What we came to the conclusion was we support a state-based exchange. We deal with a myriad of federal regulations on dairies throughout the state that are administered. There are federal regulations that are administered by the state of Idaho. And each and every time we would rather deal with the Department of Environmental Quality here in Idaho than the EPA. We'd rather deal with Idaho Department of Agriculture rather than the USDA. We feel in this matter we'd much rather deal with a state-based exchange where we know the people who can mediate on our behalf than we would with a federal exchange. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Olmstead. We appreciate your testimony very much. Is there anyone in the room here who has not had an opportunity to address the committee that would like to do so for 3 minutes? If you would, please come up to the front row here, and then we can come up one at a time. Is that you, sir? Please, if you would come up, state your name, and the podium is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mark Druitt. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. And one lady said that she feels like the majority in Idaho, feels a certain way. Well, I would just like you to take into account my preschoolers and people that aren't voting, and nobody's asking their opinion. But I do feel like that they would like everybody to stay out of their piggy bank, because yes, this is a big carrot that the federal government is offering to give to Idaho for 3 years or whatever to help us get rolling with this thing. But the money the federal government is giving us, well, 40-some cents of every dollar is debt. Well, what does that mean? That means somebody's going to have to pay it back. And a lot of that burden is going to fall to the next generation, the little kids. And I will succeed, that I make like $23,000 this last year. And so that means my insurance policy is like $5,000 deductible, and it probably doesn't cover a lot. And under a government health care program, I might get something that might save my life, might give me a couple more years. But I would rather, was it Patrick Henry that said, give me liberty or give me death? I would rather just die a couple years earlier than put my preschoolers, in prison, because the borrower is servant to the lender. I don't want them to become servant to China. Even President Obama said, in criticizing President Bush, he said that this is a terrible crime that we would take out a credit card under China in our children's name and rack it up. Well, I feel like he's not only racked it up even worse than President Bush, but he's asking us to do it too. He's asking us to be complicit with that. And I do think we'll be answerable if we do touch that piggy bank. And I don't want to sell their birthright, for a meal. And yes, it will be more pleasant early on probably to do some of these things. But I think there are other ways we could tackle these problems. Tackling the cost, my friend just is $90,000 in debt from her school bills. There's got to be some way to tackle those costs. And from my view, more government involvement has risen the cost. Everything the government gets more involved in raises the cost, whether it's education, it reduces competition. The whole thing one lady brought up about legal proceedings, you get like Arizona, the taxpayer has to pay money to Arizona, and they have to pay money to the federal government to sue Arizona about it just gets more and more complicated. It's not government's job. Let people be responsible. Let us be a free country, because other countries like Hugo Chavez people ran here to be free. Well, where do Americans go to be free from tyranny? We're the bastion of hope, so let's keep it that way, and I thank you for your service.
Thank you so much, sir. Next, ma'am. Would you please state your name, and then the podium is yours. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I heard many of the people who are in support of this speak as though we only have two choices, and that we are going to get money from the federal government to do this, and we have to do it because if we don't do it, they will do it. And we don't have to have that attitude. This is America, and it's time for the states to start standing up for their sovereignty and say, no, we won't comply with federal mandates that are unconstitutional. As the one gentleman said before, it is up to the states and the people to determine what is constitutional. It is not in the Constitution that the Supreme Court decides that. So I would like to say the exchange is not a small part of ACA, as Mr. Hensley said. Without the taxes, penalties, and fees collected through a state exchange, and only a state exchange, the ACA doesn't function. Federal money is non-existent. As the man who spoke before me said, 42 cents is being borrowed now. If we institute new programs, more than 42 cents on every dollar will be borrowed. The money that you anticipate must either be borrowed or printed, either way burdening countless future generations. We don't know how far into the future this is burdening people who don't get a chance to vote on it, and that is taxation without representation. The exchange will not be able to deny participation by insurers and plans as long as they conform to federal law. Every aspect of its operation, this state exchange that's called a state exchange, but it really won't be, will be governed by the federal law. Local regulators will enforce federal regulations as written in the ACA, which says a state exchange can have no rules or regulations that conflict with federal regulations. The information that a person is not subject to the federal mandate must be conveyed to the federal government. We have to ask the federal government for permission not to have insurance? Is this America? In order to beg for an exemption, we will have to submit all of our personal information. We can pull the plug. Have you ever seen a federal program closed? If you are sure the federal government will fund or find the money to establish an exchange, if Idaho doesn't, you must also be aware that according to the text of the ACA as read by Senator Nonini, they will have full control of the exchange, whether it's a federal exchange or a state exchange. Thank you.
Ma'am, could we get your name for the?
Sheila Ford. I'm sorry.
Sheila Ford.
I'm
Good to see
nervous.
you, Ms. Ford. Thank you so much. Is there a Daniel Friedman? Okay. Mr. Friedman, go ahead, sir. If you would state your name for the record, Daniel Friedman. Obviously, I'll do that for you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is Daniel Friedman, and I represent myself. I am a businessman here in Idaho with a family business in RV parks, but primarily I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my family. There's a couple things that I'm hearing in this discussion that I wanted to bring out. First of all is an issue of your responsibility in taking care of Idaho's state money and taking care of the state of Idaho and its business versus the practical implications on the individual and on businesses that you also have the responsibility of protecting. What I mean by that is I've heard people talk about if we do a state exchange, it's going to allow us to control more, it's going to allow us to save more money as a state. Perhaps that's true, but the other side of that is the state's citizens that you're in the position of protecting and serving. What about their interests? What are the practical implications for them and their money and their employers or employees and their family members? And I think you have the responsibility of dividing those issues. We may be saving the state money, but at the expense of citizens and their money in a very practical way. I've heard people talk about health insurance providers and so forth. We're saying that certain jobs may be lost if we didn't provide a health exchange here in Idaho. Well, if we don't, as a state, protect our citizens and our businesses, there's going to be a lot of other jobs that are lost because businesses will react. They will have to cut hours. They will have to change their organization, their structure, and there's going to be a lot of collateral damage from this. So I would encourage you to think about dividing those responsibilities in your own mind. The second thing I would encourage you to think about separating is the Idaho Exchange from the PPAC, or the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. That's my major problem with the exchange right now as it's written in House Bill 248. There's language that connects this Idaho exchange to the federal mandate. If Idaho wants to make a state exchange, make a state exchange, but don't connect it to the federal mandate. Divorce it from that mandate. And that way, you're not implicitly participating in the mandate. If it's good for Idaho to make a state exchange, do so. But divorce it from the federal one. Keep those things separate. We always have the opportunity to not participate. I'm a homeschooling father. I don't participate in Idaho-based education. I pay for my own medical expenses. We have home births. I take care of my own. I pay for my own. You guys have the opportunity to do that as well. Simply not participating is always an option. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Next, sir. If you would state your name, sir, the podium is yours. Thank you.
Certainly. My name is Steve Ackerman, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Steve Ackerman. Quick background, I've done competitive research on half a dozen insurance companies, 4 of those being Blues. Also, I have worked in an emergency room in a public hospital where I saw us bring in 180 patients every day, 7 days a week, and I also conducted the billing for those. I've seen quite a bit of misery, suffering. I rise against House Bill 248 for a few reasons. The first, and I'm just going to throw a couple comments here. I have a full written testimony I've left. This state exchange will not protect Idaho's budget or its taxpayers. Page 5, line 13 says that Idaho shall not be liable for any obligations of the exchange. And Section 1311 of the Affordable Care Act says it must be self-sustaining by January 1st, 2015. The problem is the cost estimate has gone from $20 million in Senate Commerce and HR to $30 million on the Senate floor. And I have heard from some of your colleagues, $50 million. So the obvious question is, when you have a state exchange cost jump an estimated 50%, then another 67%, and end up 150% over its original estimate, that's fairly dangerous to vote on. I was also a analyst on the President's Base Closure Commission, and I would not be able to present that kind of a finding to the legislature. The other point is page 2, lines 38, 39, page 3, lines 9 and 14. Only 18% of the total voting members are actual legislators, less than a fifth. And yet, because of the self-sustaining clause, we are bound to ensure that fees must reach coverage of the operational costs. We have a $10 million figure. It is an estimate. It is a leftover figure from the end of the governor's task force. It's the only figure that hasn't changed. The other one has moved towards $77 million. This one hasn't changed, so it makes me question how one can move so dramatically, the other not. In the meantime, we see a user fee go from $3 per member per month to $7 per member per month, and is now landed at $4.80 per member per month. 134% increase, decreasing by 31.4%, and ending up 60% higher than the original estimate. That makes me nervous. Also, what is the basis of 177,000 of enrollment? I asked that question to the governor's staff. Nearly a month later, after writing an email saying I'm disappointed, I got an answer. We think it'll be 177,000. What is the basis of that assumption? It's not, it is a voluntary program. It is apparently losing popularity. Can we rely upon 177,000? I have a few more points. I'm more than happy to take questions, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much. Next, sir.
I'm not on your list. I got in here early and didn't.
That's fine. If you would state your name.
My name is Bob Van Arnhem.
Thank you.
I'm a citizen, and I just came in here pretty much with a neutral point of view at this point, just to get educated, find out various points of view. It's hard to get the facts. A lot of different areas in the world we live in today. So I have some questions that have come to mind that I just want to throw out. I'm wondering what a state exchange will do to help fix what I think a consensus pretty much would agree, well, that is a consensus. Pretty much most folks would agree is a broken system. So how will this state exchange help fix a broken healthcare system? One of the most troublesome things that bothers me the most about the whole insurance business and the healthcare system is the absence of credibility in the charging. For example, I recently had an experience where the list price of the service was $1,400. The hospital wrote off $1,000, and the provider was paid $400. Now, I come from a business background, and I'm just wondering, does anybody believe that system of pricing is credible, and what does it mean? I've heard the word oftentimes associated with the exchange of affordability. Well, this will make insurance affordable. I'd like to know what that translates into dollars. For example, that $1,400 list price service that I received will now be, if I'm in the exchange, will now be $1,000, will it be $800? It's relative, right? I mean, it's where we each are financially, whether we can afford something or not. So I'd like to have know a little bit better about that word affordability. There are other words like transparency and sustainable that you hear today, and they're good-sounding words, but define the terms. What does it mean? I'd like to know what it translates to in dollars and cents out of my pocket, how a state exchange will benefit me more than the present system, if it's going to fix it at all or merely complicate it more. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to speak.
Well, sir, you certainly get the prize for the most provocative questions of the day. I can assure you of that.
Good.
And I'm not sure that, well, I certainly don't know the answer to those.
Didn't think you would, but certainly worth looking into. Right?
You bet it is. Okay. And thank you so much. Appreciate your testimony very, very much. Is there anyone else in the room that wishes to either testify for or against House Bill 248? Let the record reflect that no one else has requested to testify either for or against House Bill 248. Committee, House Bill 248 is properly before the committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Pardon?
Chairman, we're going to actually vote then today?
It's my intention to vote today. The bill is properly before the committee. Representative.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I believe there's no knowledge that or surprise that I'm against House Bill 248. I believe there's a lot of questions here that are not answered. I believe it's not really a state exchange, as we keep stating. It is a private exchange because the state has no supervision or legislative oversight outside of reports given to us. And so, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I really think this is a private exchange. It's not a state exchange. We've had references to DEQ as an agency that the state creates to compete against or to monitor and work with as far as instead of EPA, but DEQ is a state agency. And so, Mr. Chairman, I really think that this is a bad move on the part of the state.
Thank you, Representative Vanderwoude. Representative Rushi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had an opportunity to be involved in health insurance industry for, gosh, a long time, almost 20 years now. And I did participate in the governor's work group where we examined not just the concepts and the options available to us, but also estimates of the costs. And we heard a lot of numbers today, but I have to remind people that those are estimates, whether it was the initial $20 million Phase 1 grant or the discussion of maybe $70 million to create, or the more reasonable latest assessment of $30 million. But those are just estimates. And until we have really the board and the bylaws and the operating documents, it's going to be really hard to pin the estimates down any further. So I do think, though, based on the experience and my experience in the testimony through the work group, that it is going to be less expensive operationally for the state exchange rather than the federal exchange. But the most of the discussion today has been, I think, not really pertinent to the bill. The discussion has been the oppressive nature of the federal government, nullifying Obamacare, socialized medicine, and instead what we're asked is how private insurance products are going to be presented to the Idaho population. Are we going to present it through a state-managed tool or through a federally managed tool? And I think that's the real question in front of us. And because of the fact that, you know, people in D.C. or Bethesda, Maryland really don't understand what Idaho is about, the fact that we can do it likely more inexpensively, I think that it really behooves us to move forward. So, Mr. Speaker, or I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I move we send House Bill 248 to the floor with a due pass.
Thank you, Representative Rushi. First of all, I'm going to, while the rest of the committee is drafting up some notes here, because I'm sure everyone on the committee wants to comment on this. I just want to take this opportunity for myself as chairman of the committee and on behalf of all the committee members to thank each of you here that came today. And I want to thank each of you coming up to the podium and expressing your thoughts and your concerns. Because as a matter of decorum, I couldn't have hoped for a better conduct of yourself representing Idahoans who come to your government to speak your piece and what's on your mind. And no matter what the committee decides or what it doesn't decide, the fact is that I want you to know, and the committee wants you to know, that we're very proud of you, that you came here, you took the time to come and do it. And I think that's all that we can really ask of anybody to do. You were very respectful, and I appreciate that very much, because things like this can have a habit of turning into a rodeo in a short notice. And so I just want to thank each of you, because I think you did an exemplary job of stating a very deep, passionate belief in what you believe in, and the committee does respect that. And I just want everybody here to know that. So, Representative Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo what you have said to everyone who came here today. I understand the passion behind everything that was said and appreciate the input that you've given us. And we've been getting input along each step of the way through our conversations here. I also want to thank the governor for the thankless work of working on an unpopular stance, but ultimately a stance that is an Idaho stance. I know there's been pressure from across the state and across the nation to say we need to do what other states are doing, but we need to do what Idaho needs to do. And the reality is we're facing a healthcare crisis in this country, and Obamacare is not the answer. Idaho needs its own plan, and we're not going to take control of our sovereignty by rolling over and letting the federal government take control of our healthcare in Idaho. We've been 15 years working up to this point, understanding that we've been working towards a crisis point with healthcare in this country and in our state. We have to take advantage of the next 15 years to make sure that Idaho is a leader in providing healthcare and making sure that we have the best opportunities for individuals, for healthcare providers, and for families in Idaho. And we're not going to do that by letting the federal government come in and take over. So this healthcare exchange that we're looking at, while it's not a perfect answer, it's the perfect answer for Idaho, given the situation that we're dealing with right now. And given that, I'm going to be voting yes on the motion. Thank you.
Representative Morse.
Mr. Chairman and members of the audience, we had a variety of testimony today. I think a lot of that testimony represents the opposition and angst about Obamacare. But from my perspective, this is an issue on the exchange, not an issue on Obamacare. So it's a choice between a federal exchange that we have much less control and input versus a state nonprofit exchange. We're in about the third iteration of this bill. I think the changes made to the bill strengthen it. I think that there will be continued litigation and challenges to Obamacare. And by opting for the state exchange, we've got the flexibility as well as the legal control and triggers built into this bill, that if any part of that Obamacare is ruled invalid or unconstitutional, we can collapse and stop the administration of those portions of it. I believe that a federal exchange would continue on probably forever. And so there's issues of control. There's control in terms of insurance regulation. There's control in terms of the roles of navigators versus local agents. There are issues of the impact on our insurance companies and our insurance markets, which impact consumer choice and impact access to care. And it's for all those reasons that I believe that the state exchange provides a superior choice and a better choice than allowing this exchange to be run by the federal government. So for those reasons, I am in favor of the House bill.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and the public who's sitting here. It's by way of background, I just wish to emphasize for the record that from the very beginning of the consideration of an exchange, whatever type it was, I have always felt that the private sector could do it better than government. I never felt that government should have a role in it. Now, House Bill 248, there is an identity of the state of the Idaho government. But I can tell you that I believe that House Bill 248 comes as close to my ambition that the private sector administer and fund an exchange as we can get. There were compromises that were made, but I see certain aspects of House Bill 248 that represent a statement that I strongly support, and I hope everyone will take the time to unemotionally and objectively read the bill. There's a couple of sentences I want to read for the record because they are the basis of my support for House Bill 248. Under the purpose and intent of this, this legislation, I believe the state of Idaho and all its citizens is making a bold and assertive statement of state rights. I'm going to read the first sentence or two. It's under purpose and intent. It is the public policy of the state of Idaho to actively resist federal actions that would limit or override state sovereignty under the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And through this legislation, through House Bill 248, the state of Idaho asserts its sovereignty by refusing to surrender decision-making authority over health care issues. That's a strong, bold, assertive statement that I strongly support. And when you read the bill, go to page 2, and under the establishment of the exchange and the board, there's a statement here that brings me to where my ambitions always were for the private sector, for an independent group to manage the estate. Here's what this bill says and what it does. Under the establishment of the exchange and the board, Section 1, there is hereby created an independent body, corporate and politic, to be known as the Idaho Health Insurance Exchange. Such exchange may exercise the authority and powers conferred by this chapter, and such exercise shall be deemed and held to be the performance of an essential public function. In Section 2, I ask for your patience. The exchange created by this chapter is not a state agency. I am going to read that again. That's part of the bill. I'm going to read it again. Section 2. The exchange created by this chapter is not a state agency, shall not be subject to the purchasing statutes and rules of the state of Idaho or subdivisions of the state, including but not limited to chapters 28 and 57. And there's code references, and shall operate subject to the supervision and control of its board. It truly will be independent. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to take the time to express my opinion.
Thank you, Representative Henderson. Representative Hickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to echo the chairman's statements to our audience today that has been made very clear that I am very thankful for all of your testimony today, and I've taken it all into consideration with the facts that I have presented in front of me. And I just want to make a statement from my part about the vote on this bill. I am the youngest member of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Representative Malik and I are both 31, and this has been a firestorm issue that we have come into, been elected to come into to review. And this has not been an easy decision. I've toiled with this night over night. I've talked to my constituents. I've talked to my business community, and I've talked to most everybody that's been in this crowd today regarding this issue. And I am very confident that I am making the right choice on my independent, being independent of lobbyist influence, of insurance influence, of the governor's office influence. I have tried to take a very independent stand on this issue. I've come to the conclusion that as a member of the Idaho House of Representatives of the state of Idaho, I cannot subject the citizens of the state of Idaho to an insolvent federal government that I do not believe has the best interests of Idaho in mind. And at the end of the day, I think that many of the people in here agree with that premise, and I think we're all trying to come to the same conclusion. I prefer to stand in front of Idaho citizens rather than behind. I stood opposed to a state exchange for a long time before I came and actually did my homework. And really read through thousands of pages of laws, sat through countless meetings, and really tried to make sense of what I was about to endeavor on as a new Idaho State Representative. Excuse me. I am not ready to cede all authority for this exchange over to the federal government. I cannot stand here before you today and let that happen. I am just as committed to protecting state sovereignty as I think most of the legislators in this state are, and I know that our governor is as well. It's taken me a long time to get to this point to be able to sit up here in front of you all to say this, but I have done the research on this, and I have put the time in, and I'm confident in my decision. I feel that we have enough protection in place with House Bill 248 to keep costs low to all Idaho state citizens who choose, let me emphasize this, choose to use the health care insurance exchange. We have worked diligently to protect Idaho concerns, many of them that we have heard today. For example, information protection, which right here in the law, this is on page 5, section G, before the exchange begins taking applications or collecting information from exchange users, the board shall certify to the director and governor that personal information collected from and about any person who voluntarily uses the exchange, including but not limited to healthcare records and income, is and will continue to be secure. Also states the exchange shall not inquire about the use, ownership, possession, or storage of any firearm or ammunition by anyone using the exchange. One of the parts that I think has not been spoken enough of up here today is that in Section J, the state of Idaho shall not be liable for any obligations of the exchange. I think that's very important to understand. And I also think it's important to understand this is the reason why this was set up as an independent body, corporate and politic, because we are weary of what's happening at a federal level. We don't want bad things to happen to Idaho citizens. Therefore, what we've put in place is something that the state of Idaho will not have liability under with this new corporate body, independent politic. Now, we've had some concerns about legislators having lack of oversight with this, and that was, I think, for our group of 16 freshmen that came to pass, we had that same concern with the original Senate bill, which was 1042. So what we did is we got together as a group and tried to make that stronger, and I think that this bill encompasses everything that we put forward that we felt was going to better the bill, and as well as the governor's office being willing to come to the table with the House of Representatives to make this a much better bill yet, with having much more oversight. That's been argued amongst representatives, but here's what I can tell you, is that by having Senate confirmation, by having the reporting requirement that goes to every legislator, and on top of that, for the legislature to have the ultimate authority to repeal this act at any point in time, I am willing to give this a shot to try to save Idaho citizens money and to make it to where we, as a government, an Idaho government, can stand in front of the people of the state of Idaho to the federal government. And I'm committed to doing that as your state representative. Again, this has not been an easy decision for any of us up here on this podium, nor will it be an easy decision when it hits the House floor. In closing, I just want to say that given all the facts that have been presented, and given that we have to make a decision on this right now, I will stand with the state exchange, but I will keep a very close eye on it going forward, as I think all of us will in the state legislature. I will be supporting the motion, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hickson. Representative Perry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd just like to take an opportunity to thank everybody who came here today and presented testimony. The one thing that I have always truly appreciated about Idaho is actually our open governance. There are many states where people are not allowed to walk even into their capital, much less be able to come in front of their legislators and be able to testify in front of a committee, or even have the ability to call a legislator and talk to them directly. It truly is a privilege that Idahoans have, and all of us I know here work to make sure that that remains intact. So I just want you to know that we all appreciate that very much. I have a couple comments I think that that I would like to make. One of the speakers today asked if you've ever had to purchase insurance, and I almost raised my hand when she said to do that, because I have. For more than a decade, I've had to purchase my own insurance for our family, and it's a very complicated, confusing process. And I wish at the time that I was doing it, quite honestly, that there was a one-stop shopping place where I could compare policies side by side. I thought that would have been helpful. And I remember as I was going through that process, even thinking that, wouldn't it be nice if we could just go and I could compare everything side by side, rather than having to take as much of the time that I had to take to do the personal research myself, and then find an insurance agent that I felt, was going to work for me. So the exchange part of this itself, that puts everything online, I'm perfectly comfortable with. I understand that a lot of people are upset about the Obamacare policies, other policies besides just the exchange, and I understand that. But I kind of wonder also if people understand that currently you are already operating under some of those policies. Some of the policies that came out in PPACA have been put in place since 2010, and changes to your insurance that you now have are also reflective of policies that have already been put in place. If your children up to age 26 are currently on your health insurance, that's part of PPACA. I mean, there are already things that have been in place. And so I think what's important to understand is that instilling an exchange where the state actually operates it is really a separate issue from the Obamacare policies. Those policies are already going on and have already been in place since 2010. And others will continue to unfold. And many of them you will probably unfold and you won't even be aware of them because they've either made a difference to you or they have not. And so I think that's really important for everybody to understand. One thing that I really like about this bill, several things that have been put in place, but one thing that was brought out today I think is important is that it's voluntary. This exchange may or may not affect you. You can choose to use it. You can choose not to use it. If you already have insurance through your employer, it may not affect you in any way, shape, or form. And it is voluntary. And I would even stand up and go so far as to say whether I choose to purchase health insurance myself, whether the federal law tells me I can, I should, or not, I still get that choice. Absolutely. Absolutely. I am a person about choice, and you still have that choice. And I know that people have worked to maintain that choice, with the caveat that you have to understand that all choices, positive or negative, come with consequences. But you know what? We still live in a society, and we get to make those choices. So I am very happy that we're making it clear that the exchange is voluntary. And here again, it may or may not have any impact on you at all. I think. What I did also appreciate was the testimony from the Catholic Charities, who completely understood that changes to the Obamacare PPACA policies have to be made at the federal level. as do a lot of policies that deal with food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Most of those all have to be made at the federal level. But the state does have some control, and maybe control is the wrong word, but we do have some flexibility in how we implement things. And I think that really this bill before us has been the culmination of 2 years. This committee here has not, I mean, we sat here and listened to testimony today, but this was not the only input we have received on this bill. Many of us have spent over a year looking into this policy ourselves, and of course we've had phone calls, emails, we've been directed to websites and articles that we have researched. And a lot of it, true again, if you'd like to continue to battle against the policies, I would encourage you to do that. But I also think that you might want to change the battlefield that you're doing it on, and perhaps take that up to the federal level, because I do think that the feds probably need a lot of the they need to hear that just as much as your state legislators needed to hear that as well. One other thing that we wanted to say was that Idaho, you know, it was like, well, Idaho shouldn't be a follower. I would agree. I think Idaho should be a leader. And I think that in a lot of ways, Idaho has been a leader in this, because Idaho is not giving into ideology here, but it is actually, it has taken the time to bring in outside companies that could do objective research into this, using data, facts, research, stakeholder input. A lot of it has been put into place in here, and I think that Idaho is actually taking a stand and protecting its citizens rather than just handing everything over to the federal government. Because if you take a look at the federal government, for heaven's sakes, take a look at the post office. Somehow the private industry, UPS and FedEx, boy, they seem to be able to make a profit, but the post office itself loses $1 billion a year. And and some states want the feds to go ahead and run something in their state. That really surprises me. Every state in the union is going to have an exchange. Every state will have a state exchange. It's just a matter of who's actually going to operate it. And I think after I've considered everything, I really would rather see Idaho and the legislators and the people that you have elected to be in charge of that. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to support the motion.
Thank you, Representative Perry. Representative Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Perry said, "Do you want to be me?" At my age, that would be quite a promotion. This has really been a difficult process for me. It's one that didn't come easily. I'm a freshman legislator. Imagine that. Again, at my age. But I'm proud to say that I'm one of the 16 that stood up and wanted to make some changes to what we considered a weak bill. And I believe that all of the changes that we recommended were implemented, and even a couple more, which I think made a marginal bill a better bill, a much better bill. I didn't join on early on. I came later in the process of joining a team of 16. But I'm proud to be an Idahoan. It's what I think Idaho needs to do at this time. I'm not interested in letting the federal government come in and do this for us. I think we have more opportunities to make corrections as we move forward if we run the program as a state program, not as a state agency, but state leadership. I'm grateful for the testimonies I've heard here today. As I counted, there was 38, and I made note of each one of your comments. Add that to a list of many, many others, emails, phone calls, conversations. But Mr. Chairman, I'm going to vote for this motion that's on the floor.
Thank you, Representative Romero. Representative Hansi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, in my heart of hearts, I wish we were debating whether we nullify the whole Obama health care bill and send it back to the feds. Unfortunately, we're not doing that. What we're debating is whether we have a federal exchange or a state exchange. And the state exchange is the best program for the state. It is unfortunate that we have this whole health care problem in America, and we do. This may be a fumbled attempt by the federal government to try and resolve it, but the health care costs are rising dramatically year after year after year to where the system will fall within itself. Saying that, I'm not supporting Obama health care. I'm saying we have to recognize we have a problem. And if we are going to work together to try and resolve some of the problems we have in the healthcare industry in our state, the state's exchange seems to be the best way that I can see that we should go. I will support it. I will watch it. And I hopefully in a year or 2 years we'll all come back and say it did work and this was a good idea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Hansi. Representative Vandewater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as to stand possibly as the lone voice against this, I would like to point out a few things that on page 3, when we're calling this a state exchange, on page 3 on line 47, we are adopting by federal standards the section of code. It's not state. We are now adopting federal regulations, and any new regulations that they pass on down, we're automatically saying those are good without review, without looking at them. I think that's a very dangerous precedent to set. I've seen it happen in a few other instances. When I adopt a federal standard, I would like to see it before I adopt it. I think that's a very dangerous part in this bill. I also, if you go to page 4, and we've talked about a state exchange, and you go to line 6 through 9 or 6 through 8, the bylaws are written by the board. They're not approved by anybody besides the board itself. And any changes in the bylaws are at the discretion of the Director of Insurance. There's no state approval of bylaw changes. There's no oversight in bylaw changes outside of they will report to us the bylaw changes. And while I can appreciate the Gang of 16 in their recommendations to improve this bill, there was one recommendation that I brought that I would like to have the fee capped at $10. Because as we've seen with a lot of different numbers that are floating around here that are saying, you know, well, it's going to cost $20 million, it's going to cost $30 million, it's going to be cheaper than the feds, it's only going to cost $5, now it's $7, and it's $6.88. I understand it's hard to know what the exact figure is going to be until we know what the structure is going to be. So I had recommended that we put into this bill a cap of $10. And I was told this is not a state agency. We cannot control the cap. We cannot put that into this bill because then we as a state are interfering with a non-state agency. So we cannot cap the fee. We have put them on a stipulation that they have to be self-sufficient. That fee could be $200. It could be $500. It could be $5. But they have to be self-sufficient. So we're hanging our hat on their self-sufficiency, but we're not capping what we're going to be charged when we get done with this. And there's no protection for religious conscience in this bill, which I would have liked to have had. If the federal government can grant religious protection to religious agencies, such as universities that are religious, why can't the government grant religious conscience exceptions to individuals? My religion as an individual, to me, is just as important as a Catholic religion may be to a university, and it's my own personal religion. It's not somebody else's. It's mine, and I believe that this bill does not protect that part of it. And so, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I guess I will stand as the lone voice against this bill.
Hey, thank you. Is there anyone else that wish, Representative Hickson?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to say, I respect Representative Vander Woude's position, and I respect a lot of the positions that I've heard today, and I agree with that. I agree with a lot of what's been said. Here's what we need to understand, is that if we go and default to a federal exchange, we give up all negotiation authority at that point in time. I'm the type of guy, I like to come to the table and negotiate a little bit. And if we give that up, then when we talk about religious freedoms, when we talk about things of that nature, we give that up to a very liberal, socialistic federal government that I don't agree with. Now, another portion of this is the navigator portion. And I'm about as pro-life as they come when we talk about pro-life issues. And I certainly don't want entities that I don't agree with navigating me to buy my policies. That would happen at a federal level. And that's one piece of research that we have done on this bill. So to me, negotiation is key. Backing away from the table is not an option for me. And I think that's the reason why you see, excuse me, a majority of the legislature lean that direction. I understand where Representative Vander Woude is coming from. Understand, though, that if the fees do increase, if we see those fees get out of control, again, we as a legislature have the ultimate authority to repeal this act. And trust me, we will be keeping a very close eye on it. So I do not want to give up my negotiation authority. And that's the reason why I felt I had to make that statement.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any other comments at this point in time? The chair wishes to, before I forget, I spoke with the Attorney General, and his advice was that he didn't think that I needed to declare a conflict under Rule 38. However, he also advised me that no one ever got in trouble for declaring an abundance or more often than necessary. So with respect to that committee, the chairman wishes to declare under Rule 38 that my employer and or its subsidiaries may or may not be affected by this legislation. I just want that out there for the record so that no one could ever raise any questions. In 1996, Governor Batt appointed me to the Idaho Fish and Game Commission. And that was about the time that the federal government decided that they were going to ship wolves into the state of Idaho. And Idaho wasn't given a choice about that. We were told that there's a truckload of wolves coming and you're going to take them. Now, at that point in time, the federal government agreed that if we managed the wolves would be a 10J experimental population below Interstate 90 in the north, and that population could be managed at a level of 10 breeding pairs. Okay? Well, the state legislature's response at that point in time was to immediately say we're not going to have anything to do with wolves. And they passed a law that said the Idaho Department of Fish and Game could not have anything to do with the management of wolves, and that no money from the Fish and Game budget or any other state budget could be expended on wolf management. Well, the feds had a pretty simple answer to that. They just went up and contracted with an Indian tribe, and the rest is history. How many wolves do we have now? And what has that done to our elk populations and our game populations, et cetera? Well, everybody knows what has happened. I don't like the choice here that we have. The fact is that we have to have an exchange. And to try to answer some of the questions, and I've been working on this for a couple of years, but I think the final straw for me was when I called a gentleman at HHS by the name of Mr. Paul DioGuardia, and I asked permission to reference his name, and so I do have permission to reference his name. And he is in charge of intergovernmental relations at HHS. And so I said, Mr. DiGuardia, we know what the governance structure of a state exchange is going to look like. I know that I can walk across the street, figuratively, not necessarily literally, but they'll be somewhere in Boise, and talk to those 19 individuals that are on that board. I said, so if you would, sir, please tell me what the governance structure of a federally facilitated exchange is going to look like. This was about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago. And he said, well, Representative, I can't tell you that. I don't know who it's going to be. It will be somebody from HHS in Washington, D.C., although a portion of it may be run out of Region 10 in Seattle. That decision hasn't been made yet, and the governance structure hasn't been decided, but rest assured, Representative, that it will be managed and operated out of HHS in Washington, D.C. That, to me, solved that little answer right there. I think the sentiment here, and certainly the sentiment from me, is that I will never acquiesce either directly or by default, and that's what we would be doing here, is by default, acquiescing to have the federal government walk into the state of Idaho and manage a sector of Idaho's economy. I think that's wrong. I don't support that. And in my opinion, that's exactly what it would be. We would be, by default, acquiescing to a role of the federal government of doing that. Obviously, we heard testimony today that was different than that. I respect that. And in closing, I would just like to say that, again, I appreciate everybody coming here, and I think most of all about this whole process is the fact that everybody came here today literally ought to be very proud of themselves and very proud of your conduct here and very proud that you participated in your state government. Whether you agree with the decision or you don't agree with the decision, I still think that's what makes this country great. The fact that you did that, the fact that you came here, the fact that you took the time out of your lives to do that, and the committee certainly appreciates that very much. So that's the last of my remarks. Are there any final committee remarks from anybody? Representative Mallett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've set the bar high with Rule 38, so I'll make a disclosure as well. The company that I work for does have some clients in Idaho that may or may not be affected by this vote. So,
thank you. So noted. Are there any other comments before we vote? Representative Vanuatu.
Clarification, Mr. Chairman. Representative Russi was in the process of making a motion, and I didn't know if you halted him before he made the motion, or did he actually make the motion?
My understanding is that he made the motion, and that motion is to send House Bill 248 to the floor of the do-pass recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other comments? All those in favor of sending 248 to the floor of the do-pass recommendation say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Representative, would you like to be recorded? Record Representative Vanuatu as a no. Chair votes aye, and the motion passes. Committee, thank you. Audience, thank you so much. The committee is adjourned.